Every morning you meet a stranger in the mirror. You call it me, but it isn't. That face, the one you trust, fix, judge and forgive, is reversed light, delayed time, and filtered memory. No one on earth has ever seen you the way you see yourself. Not your friends, not your camera, not even the mirror. Your brain doesn't show you the world as it is. It predicts what should be there, a heartbeat late. It edits, smooths, and paints reality with emotion, turning raw light into a story you can survive. That story is comforting, but it's not true. Science calls it perceptual reconstruction. Philosophy calls it the mirror of mind. Together they form the mirror-mind paradox, the mystery that the one who looks and the one being seen are never the same person, not even for a second. Tonight, at Neuro Academy, we'll trace that illusion from photons to feelings, from the physics of perception to the quiet question behind every reflection. If the image in the glass isn't you, then who is? So take a slow breath, and let's begin at level 1, the physics of perception. You stand in front of the mirror again, this time aware that what you see is not immediate truth but a delicate illusion choreographed by time. The glass does not lie, it only reflects, yet what you perceive through it is filtered through a labyrinth of neural decisions made in less than a heartbeat. Light travels from the room to your eyes, photons strike your retinas, and the signal begins its silent journey toward meaning. But by the time that meaning arrives, by the time your mind says that's me, the present moment has already passed. You are seeing your face from the recent past, a fraction of a second behind the living moment you inhabit. Those missing milliseconds, about 80 of them, are invisible to you, and yet they shape every instant of experience. The brain delays perception so it can synchronize a scattered flood of sensory data. Touch, sound, sight, balance, all travel at different speeds. Your mind waits, gathering enough fragments to form a coherent picture of now. That pause is so small, it feels like immediacy, but in truth you live slightly behind reality, carried on a stream of predictions that your brain is constantly updating. Imagine it as standing in a control room full of screens showing the world with a tiny lag. To survive, the brain cannot simply watch, it must forecast. So while one network is processing the image that just arrived, another is already guessing what will happen next. This predictive model smooths the world's chaos into continuity, like a film projector blending still frames into motion. Without it, the smallest delay would splinter the world into confusion, sound out of sync with sight, movement jerking instead of flowing. Your visual cortex, deep in the back of your brain, functions as both scientist and artist. It analyzes, infers, and paints the missing pieces before you even notice they're gone. The photons that hit your eyes are only raw data, blurred, partial, upside down. It's your mind that flips the image upright, fills in the edges, brightens the shadows, and tells you that you are looking at yourself in the mirror, rather than at a shimmering pattern of light. Every color you see is an interpretation, every contour, a decision. You live inside the world your brain continuously invents. Think about that for a moment. The universe arrives at your senses as pure signal, stripped of meaning. Only when it reaches the living circuits of your mind does it become a face, a memory, a sense of you. The mirror shows your skin, your eyes, the familiar curve of your mouth. But your perception shows something deeper, the synthesis of physics and biology, creating an experience you call reality. The brain is not a camera, it is a sculptor, shaping time itself into something perceivable. Now step back from the glass and watch what happens when you move. Your reflection follows perfectly, or so it seems. But inside your skull, millions of neurons are predicting that movement before it happens. The brain has already guessed which muscles you'll use to tilt your head or blink your eyes, adjusting its image of you before the photons even arrive. It must do this to keep up with the speed of life. If it waited for raw data, the world would lag and tremble. The only reason you experience continuity is because your mind is always half a moment ahead, painting in reality's next frame. This system works so well that the illusion feels seamless. You never feel the delay, never notice the stitching, and yet beneath that smooth surface, your sense of now is stitched from fragments of the immediate past. The philosopher may call it the moving present, but the neuroscientist calls it temporal integration. Your mind merges small windows of time into a single convincing moment. It's like listening to an orchestra play slightly out of sync. The conductor of your consciousness corrects every note, so the melody feels whole. But what does that mean for identity? If every instant you perceive has already happened, Who is the you doing the seeing? Are you the observer living in the present, or the echo constructed a moment later? The question sounds abstract, but it's deeply physical. The brain must edit reality to make it livable. You are a participant in that illusion, and it is so complete that it becomes self. The self is not separate from perception. It is perception constantly updated, never fully current. There's a quiet beauty in that imperfection. Those 80 milliseconds of delay are what make your world smooth, your movements graceful, your life coherent. They are the space in which thought is born, the pause that allows awareness to exist. If perception were instantaneous, you would have no room to reflect. There would be no gap for consciousness to step into, no time for the mind to notice itself noticing. The delay gives rise to awareness itself. Now, let your gaze drift away from the mirror to the world beyond it, the edges of the room, the subtle flicker of light against the wall. Every object you see is also slightly delayed, a prediction wrapped around truth. The same mechanism that lets you see your own face governs how you see everything. The world is reconstructed in your head, not simply recorded. What you call seeing is really remembering the future a moment before it happens. Science shows this most clearly in experiments on motion perception. When a ball moves across a screen, your eyes track it, but your brain guesses its path ahead of time. If the ball suddenly vanishes, you still see it continuing for a fraction of a second, your prediction outliving the data. The same principle applies to your reflection. When you move, the image in the mirror appears instantaneous, but your brain is filling in the gaps, predicting where your head or hand should be. It's an exquisite lie that keeps the world whole. And if the brain is always guessing, always correcting, then perception becomes a form of storytelling. Each sense contributes a sentence, each correction a revision, until reality feels like a polished narrative. You are the author and the audience, the scientist and the dreamer. The mirror becomes your collaborator, a silent co-writer reflecting the story back to you. In that story, there's no fixed truth, only continuous interpretation. The mirror does not show your essence, it shows your brain's best hypothesis, and maybe that's enough. Because within that tiny margin of uncertainty, between what is real and what is believed, lies everything that makes you human: curiosity, imagination, empathy, hope. The same predictive machinery that lets you see your face also lets you envision the future, anticipate another's feelings, and create meaning out of chaos. So the next time you stand before a mirror, remember, you are not looking at yourself as you are, but as your brain believes you were a moment ago. You are both scientist and subject, observer and observed, existing forever, just behind the present. And if every perception is a prediction, then perhaps every reflection hides a prophecy. Tomorrow we will step deeper into that prophecy, into the strange symmetry of the inverted face, and what it means to never truly see yourself the way others do. You lean closer to the mirror, as if proximity could bring truth into focus. The surface seems to shimmer slightly, though you know it's only the dance of light. You study the details, the curve of your nose, the lines around your eyes, the subtle asymmetry that no one else ever notices. Yet the longer you stare, the more something feels inverted. It's not just left and right, it's reality itself, reversed, quietly rewritten. In the mirror, your right hand becomes your left. Your familiar face, so ordinary, so yours, exists only in this mirrored form. It's a version of you that no one else has ever seen. When others look at you, they see the true alignment, your hair parted the other way, your smile curving in its real direction, but your brain has imprinted this reversed image as your identity, the face that feels most you. For everyone else, that face doesn't exist. The strangeness of that thought lingers like mist. The version of you that feels authentic is a reflection that the world will never meet. It lives only inside your mind, a private mirror self. If someone were to show you a perfectly accurate, non-reversed photo, you might sense something unsettling, an uncanny dissonance that psychologists call the mere exposure effect. Your brain favors what it's used to, even if it's an illusion. The mirror becomes the truth simply because you've seen it most often. Inside your head, networks of neurons in the temporal and occipital lobes weave this preference into your self-concept. The visual system records the inverted image as the baseline. Over years of repetition, your mirror face becomes emotionally charged with familiarity. Each morning, as you meet your reflection, your brain strengthens the link between that image and your sense of identity. What you love, what you critique, what you try to hide, all attached to the reversed you. You have grown intimate with your opposite. Now imagine meeting your mirror twin in person, a version of you flipped back into its true orientation. Most people, when faced with that accurate version through photos or video, feel something slightly alien. It's called the mirror flip discomfort. The symmetry is correct, but the recognition falters. It's as if you're encountering a stranger who wears your expressions, but not your alignment. Artists have long noted this. Even Leonardo da Vinci wrote in mirrored script, perhaps unconsciously drawn to the reflection that felt most natural to his brain. The paradox runs deep. Your mind trusts the reversed image more than the real one, because the brain prioritizes familiarity over accuracy. The neurons that map your features have been trained by years of practice to expect the left corner of your mouth to rise when you smile, not the right. So when you see the real photograph, where that motion is flipped, it seems wrong, even though it's true. The brain again prefers its own creation. But why does this matter? Because every distortion in that glass seeps into the way you think about yourself. The inverted face becomes the emotional anchor for self-judgment. When you smile in the mirror, you evaluate that reversed version. When you doubt your beauty, it's that inversion you critique. The self-image that shapes your confidence, your posture, your mood, is built upon a mirror that shows you the world backward. This is not merely poetic, it's measurable. Neuroimaging studies show that when we look at our own faces, a region near the fusiform gyrus lights up more strongly than when we look at others. It's the brain's self-recognition network trained to respond to the configuration it knows best. When that configuration is mirrored, it fires comfortably. When presented with the accurate image, the pattern weakens as if the brain hesitates to call it you. There's something tender in that neural loyalty. Your brain protects its version of you, the way a child guards a familiar storybook, preferring the known narrative over the revised one. But it also means that your self-concept is literally built on inversion. You are emotionally attached to a face that no one else has ever met, a ghost stitched together by glass and light. Think of how this inversion shapes social life. When you prepare for a conversation, fix your hair, or adjust your expression, you are performing for the mirror's audience, not the world's. The gestures you practice there are reversed. The smile that feels natural in the mirror may appear slightly different to others. You think you are perfecting your presentation, but in truth, you are perfecting a performance for the wrong stage. And yet, the mirror remains a trusted confidant. It offers control in a world of uncertainty. It answers when nothing else does. You turn to it to check if your emotions have left traces, if sadness has drawn its lines or joy has softened them. The reflection nods back, reversed but loyal. You find reassurance in that mirrored gaze because it responds immediately, obediently, without question. The relationship between you and your reflection is the first dialogue between mind and matter, a conversation where illusion feels like truth. There's a peculiar comfort in realizing that everyone carries a secret version of themselves, known only in reverse. Each of us moves through life with two faces, the one the world sees, and the one the brain believes in. Perhaps identity itself is an act of negotiation between those two realities. In a way, this inversion mirrors something deeper within the mind's design. The brain is itself a mirror of the world, taking in external patterns and flipping them into internal meaning. Just as your face reverses in glass, reality reverses inside perception. Light becomes thought, sensation becomes story, and truth becomes personal. Every act of seeing is a gentle betrayal of what actually is. You step back from the mirror, noticing how quickly the illusion reasserts itself. The reversed face no longer feels strange, it feels inevitable. You blink, and the unease fades. The brain settles back into comfort, wrapping you once more in the familiar lie. But beneath that calm surface, another question begins to stir. If your brain so easily accepts the inverted as real, what else might it be quietly rewriting? Tomorrow, we'll follow that question into the next reflection, where emotion begins to reshape perception itself. The mirror may flip your face, but your feelings can warp the entire image. You know that moment when you wake and glance at yourself in the bathroom mirror, and your reflection seems unusually distant, like it's thinking before responding. The light may be the same, the lines of your face unchanged, yet something has shifted. The eyes staring back don't entirely feel like yours. That subtle strangeness is the emotional mirror at work, the invisible hand of mood-bending perception before the glass ever does. Your mirror self, after all, is not just made of photons and reflection, it's shaped by chemistry and feeling. Beneath your skin, neurotransmitters are quietly tinting the lens of self-recognition. Serotonin, dopamine, cortisol, each one whispers a different story about who you are. When you are calm, your brain's prediction of your own face softens. It lights your reflection with warmth, reading safety in the features it has known for years. When stress surges, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped region deep in your brain, fires with suspicion. It signals the visual system to be alert for threat, even in familiar places, sometimes even in your own reflection. The result is subtle but real. Your reflection looks colder, sharper, perhaps older. The shadows under your eyes deepen. Your mouth corners seem heavier, but those changes are not always physical. They are perceptual. The brain, in its effort to keep you safe, paints the world according to its internal weather. When the emotional storm passes, the features lighten again, as if the mirror itself had forgiven you. Every feeling you have leaves fingerprints on your vision. Neuroscientists call this affective modulation, emotion reshaping perception. When happiness floods the brain, activity increases in visual regions tied to brightness and contrast, literally making the world appear more vivid. In sadness, the same circuits dim, as if light itself retreats. The mirror then becomes a perfect amplifier of that internal bias. You think you are seeing your mood reflected, but you are seeing through it. Consider this. Even when you try to look at yourself objectively, your brain cannot help but add commentary. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-evaluation, collaborates with the insula, the region that processes bodily sensations. Together, they translate emotion into judgment. A small drop in mood can tilt perception toward criticism. A surge of confidence can smooth imperfections that are still physically present. The mirror, once again, tells a story, but it's always the one your body has already started writing. It's no wonder that the same face can appear beautiful one day and unbearable the next. You might think the difference lies in lighting or fatigue, but more often it lies in neural context. Studies using functional MRI show that people with higher stress hormones rate their own faces as less attractive, even when shown identical images taken minutes apart. The chemical tides of emotion pull the shorelines of self-image back and forth, and when those tides grow extreme, they can become distortions deep enough to trap the mind. In certain people, this natural variation amplifies into a condition called body dysmorphia, a psychological mirror disorder. Here, the brain's visual and emotional systems misfire together, creating a dissonance between how one appears and how one feels. The fusiform face area still recognizes the pattern of features, but the amygdala overlays it with alarm. The result, every small asymmetry feels monstrous, every detail magnified by the brain's anxious spotlight. From the outside, the face is fine. From the inside, the reflection feels broken. The mirror no longer offers recognition, it offers accusation. In these moments, perception becomes a loop. Emotion distorts vision, and distorted vision feeds emotion. Each glance reinforces the brain's mistaken prediction, until reality itself warps to fit it. The person begins to trust the feeling more than the glass. And yet, even in milder forms, we all live in versions of this loop. A compliment can brighten the way we literally see our face. An insult can dull it. When someone you love looks at you with warmth, their gaze recalibrates your internal image, momentarily replacing your brain's bias with theirs. That's why affection can heal self-perception. It introduces an external mirror that sees beyond your emotional distortion. There's an experiment you can try, quiet and simple. Stand before a mirror when you're joyful, and again when you're sorrowful. Notice how the same features seem to tell different stories. The difference isn't in the mirror, it's in your neural filters, your limbic lighting. The brain doesn't just record, it projects, tinting every reflection with the hue of the heart. This intertwining of emotion and perception reveals something profound about the mind. There is no clean divide between seeing and feeling. Vision is never neutral. The eyes deliver data, but the brain decides meaning, and emotion is its language. When you recognize yourself, you are decoding not only light but also mood. The mirror shows you both what you are and how you are. Philosophically, this blurring dissolves the idea of an objective self. If every perception of your face changes with your inner state, then the self you see is transient, mood-shaped, alive. The brain, in its quiet artistry, uses emotion as both brush and pigment. The sadness you feel adds shadow, the joy you feel adds light. You are both the painter and the canvas. And perhaps that's the gentle secret hidden in these fluctuations. Your reflection's instability is not failure, it's evidence of vitality. The mind that shifts is the mind that feels. To look the same every day would mean your inner world has fallen silent. Instead, each glance reveals that the self is still breathing, still translating feeling into form. The emotional mirror reminds us that perception is empathy turned inward. Just as you read sadness or delight on another's face, your brain reads it on your own. It translates bodily states into visible stories, giving you a chance to understand yourself without words. When you meet your reflection after a long day, you're not merely checking appearance, you're checking alignment between mind and body, between what you show and what you feel. But there's a deeper paradox waiting beneath this one. If emotion can reshape the image of your face, can thought itself reshape the image of who you are? What happens when the reflection moves from glass to mind, when it is no longer your appearance, but your self-concept that bends under the brain's invisible light? That is the next mirror waiting for you. It has no frame, no surface, no glass. It exists entirely within the folds of thought, where the observer begins to watch itself thinking. And that's where we'll go next. Close your eyes for a moment. Without the mirror, without light, without surface, try to picture yourself, what emerges. Perhaps a vague sense of outline, the echo of your own presence, the ghost of a face hovering in the dark behind your eyelids. That too is a reflection, not of light, but of mind. It is the mental mirror, the one that functions even when no glass is near. This mirror doesn't depend on photons. It relies on memory, imagination, and a quiet, continuous act of simulation. Deep inside your brain, a network of regions is constantly constructing what neuroscientists call the self-model, an internal representation of who you are, how you move, and where your boundaries lie. It's this invisible mirror that lets you sense that you're in here, while the world is out there. It's what helps you reach for a glass of water without missing it, recognize your voice in a recording, or imagine yourself doing something tomorrow. The mind, in its solitude, builds its own image of itself. It's as though an artist paints a portrait of someone they can never step outside to see. You can't perceive your own consciousness directly, you can only perceive the reflection it creates. Each thought about yourself, every I think, I feel, I am, is a shimmer on that inner glass. In the brain, this self-model is not in one place. It arises from the interaction of many, the parietal lobes that track the body's position in space, the insula that feels its internal states, the medial prefrontal cortex that builds a story of personality and continuity. These regions exchange signals in milliseconds, sculpting a sense of me from the raw data of heartbeat, breath, memory, and prediction. You are not merely housed within this body, you are the ongoing process that keeps updating its coordinates moment to moment. Imagine for a second that this mental mirror were to stop updating. The image would freeze, you would lose track of where you end and the world begins. Something similar can happen in certain neurological conditions. In depersonalization, for instance, people describe feeling detached from themselves, as though watching their life from outside. The self-model has loosened its anchor. The reflection continues, but it no longer believes it belongs to you. Under normal circumstances, though, this mirror operates so seamlessly that you forget it exists. You walk, speak, plan, remember, all while the brain quietly maintains your internal coordinates. It predicts what your hand should feel like when you touch a surface, or how your face should move when you smile. Every action you take begins as a mental rehearsal, a simulation your brain runs in its private theater. Then only when the predicted outcome aligns with the sensory feedback from reality does the brain whisper its final approval. Yes, that's me. This prediction and correction dance is the foundation of consciousness itself. It's what allows you to maintain continuity through change. Even now, as you sit listening, your self-model is adjusting to your stillness, updating your heartbeat, regulating posture, preserving the feeling that the same you who began this sentence is the one finishing it. But that continuity is a performance, an illusion rehearsed so many times that it feels like truth. Here's a metaphor. Imagine a candle reflected in a mirror placed before another mirror. The reflections multiply into infinite regress, a corridor of light extending without end. Your mind works the same way. The first reflection is perception, you see yourself. The second is thought, you think about the self you see. The third is awareness, you notice yourself thinking about yourself. Each layer mirrors the last, producing consciousness as an endless hall of internal reflections. The brilliance of this system lies in its invisibility. You rarely notice the mirrors themselves, you only experience their light. Philosophically, this creates a riddle. If every sense of self arises from internal prediction, who or what is doing the predicting? Is there an observer behind the mirrors, or are the mirrors all there is? Neuroscience offers a humbling answer. The observer is the process. There is no single watcher standing apart from experience. The act of observing generates the illusion of a watcher. Your mind, in reflecting upon itself, conjures the sense of a central self much as light conjures an image in glass. But that doesn't make the experience less real. On the contrary, it makes it more human. We live inside this self-model like actors inside a film, aware and unaware at once. Each time you reflect on who you are, your past, your purpose, your fears, you're watching a story projected by your own neurons. And like any good film, you can lose yourself in it, forgetting that you are both the audience and the screen. Now, consider how thoughts about yourself shape behavior. When you imagine succeeding, your brain activates reward pathways similar to those triggered by real achievement. When you imagine failing, stress circuits prepare you for loss. The mental mirror doesn't just reflect who you think you are, it helps create it. Each repeated thought polishes or scratches the surface, adjusting how easily new experiences will stick. Over time, the reflection becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The philosopher Douglas Hofstadter once called this the strange loop of consciousness, a system that can represent itself and in doing so becomes both symbol and observer. In simpler terms, your brain's ability to model itself is what allows introspection, empathy, creativity, all the qualities we call human, but it's also what makes you vulnerable to self-doubt and existential confusion. The more clearly the mirror reflects, the more you notice its distortions. Sometimes those distortions can be healing. When you imagine a kinder version of yourself, your brain rehearses compassion until it becomes habit. The neural pathways of self-criticism can be rewired by practicing gentler reflections. The mind, in this sense, is not a fixed mirror, but a malleable one. It can learn to tilt toward light. Pause for a breath. Notice the quiet hum of your own awareness, the feeling of being here behind your eyes. That's the self-model at work, holding the world steady. You don't see it directly, but it's there, organizing, predicting, creating the illusion that you exist apart from the reflection. The truth, however, is softer. You are the reflection, alive only in the act of being reflected. Soon, we'll take this one step further, beyond the mental image of self into the deeper question it raises. If the brain can reflect upon itself infinitely, then who exactly is doing the looking? And what happens when the mirror tries to see its own surface? That is the paradox of consciousness itself, the reflection that looks back. You sit quietly, the mirror now only a faint memory on the edge of your vision. What remains is the question lingering like light after sunset. Who is seeing all this? If the brain builds a world of predictions and reflections, then what or who stands behind the act of seeing? Let's begin with something deceptively simple, the present moment. You may think you experience it directly, but the truth is stranger. Your consciousness lags slightly behind the world, piecing together its best guess about what's happening. That small temporal gap allows the mind to smooth experience into a story. But inside that gap, another miracle unfolds. Awareness arises. It is the brain watching itself make sense of the world. When you open your eyes, light hits the retina, signals travel through the optic nerve, and reach the visual cortex in less than 1/10 of a second. There, neurons begin predicting what you'll see next. Edges, color, movement. Yet by the time you see the image, your brain has already adjusted it to match expectation. What you perceive isn't reality as it is, it's reality as your mind believes it should be. The act of seeing is really an act of expectation. This is why neuroscientists call perception a controlled hallucination, not a false one, simply a managed one, where prediction meets data halfway. When the two agree, you call it truth. When they disagree, you call it surprise. In this sense, reality is a negotiation, not a fact. But here's where the paradox deepens. The same predictive process that shapes your vision also shapes your sense of self. Just as your eyes fill in missing details of the outside world, your mind fills in missing details of the inside world, your identity, your continuity, your story. The brain guesses who you are in the same way it guesses what you see, and like any prediction, it can be wrong. Imagine standing before that mirror again, only this time, the image shifts slightly each time you blink. It smiles when you don't, tilts when you're still, acts almost right, but never quite. That's how self-awareness feels when prediction and perception fall out of sync. You know who you are, but something doesn't fit. The mirror mind cracks a little, revealing the machinery behind the illusion. This sense of prediction is not random. Deep within the brain, networks in the anterior cingulate cortex, insular, and orbitofrontal regions work together to weigh internal and external signals. They ask constantly, Does this match what I expect of myself? When it does, you feel coherence, selfhood. When it doesn't, you feel confusion, anxiety, or awe. The emotional resonance of being me is the brain's way of signaling that prediction and reality have synchronized. You can feel it now if you pay attention. When something surprises you, a sudden noise, a painful thought, an unexpected kindness, there's a momentary pause inside, a widening of space. That pause is the mind rebalancing its predictions. You might call it realization. Neuroscientists call it prediction error. It's the pulse of change, the brief window when the world outpaces expectation and consciousness must catch up. Without these little ruptures, awareness would never grow. So in truth, consciousness is built from mistakes. The brain learns by predicting and failing, over and over, refining its internal model of both world and self. Each misjudged shadow, each unanticipated emotion teaches the mirror to reflect more clearly. Awareness is born in that tension between what you expected to see and what you actually saw. And that's where wonder comes from, the sense that something doesn't quite fit but feels too alive to dismiss. When a sunset looks impossibly vivid, or when a melody strikes you as deeper than sound, your predictive brain stumbles for a moment, unable to reconcile data with expectation. That flicker of mismatch floods you with attention. The world glows because your mind has been surprised into presence. Philosophically, this makes consciousness a paradoxical loop. You are the error and the correction, the seer and the seen. The self that looks out is constantly rebuilt by what it encounters. Every surprise rewrites you. The awareness you call I is not a fixed point, but a current, the flow of prediction meeting reality again and again. Consider how this predictive nature shapes emotion. Anxiety, at its core, is an excess of prediction. The brain overestimates threat, projecting danger where there is none. Joy, conversely, arises when the world exceeds expectation, when reality gives more than the mind dared to predict. Even love fits this pattern. It begins in surprise, in the inexplicable recognition of something or someone that breaks the mind's pattern, yet feels undeniably true. When you think of yourself, what you're really thinking of is a history of predictions that have stabilized over time. You say, I am this way, because your brain has repeatedly forecasted certain feelings, behaviors, and desires, and they've become reliable enough to trust. But even those are temporary agreements between past and present. The mirror is never still, the reflection never final. Now, close your metaphorical eyes and picture a different kind of seeing, not with your senses, but with awareness itself. Notice how thought arises, how you observe it, how another layer of noticing appears behind that. It's infinite regression again, the mind observing the mind, prediction watching prediction. There is no outermost mirror, and yet something about the process feels intimate, almost sacred. It's as if consciousness by observing itself becomes luminous. In the quiet between thoughts, when the predictive machinery slows, you glimpse a rare kind of clarity. The world stops needing explanation, the self stops needing confirmation. What remains is the pure act of awareness, the mirror before it begins to reflect. For a heartbeat, you are both the glass and the light. This perhaps is why silence feels holy. It's not the absence of thought, but the pause between predictions, a moment when the brain's need to know relaxes and simply allows what is. In that instant, the illusion and the real collapse into each other, indistinguishable. The reflection and the face become one. Yet, as always, the mind will soon resume its guessing, because that's what it must do to live. It will project, interpret, and reconstruct, building its world of gentle lies. But maybe now, you can see those lies for what they are, acts of kindness, mechanisms of survival, stories that keep you from dissolving into raw sensation. So when you next look at your reflection and feel that strange double existence, the one who looks and the one being looked at, remember this: both are predictions, both are true, both are you. And yet, just beyond them, another mirror waits, the one that reflects not your form nor your thought, but the very act of awareness itself. That's where we'll go next, into the quiet recursion of consciousness, where the observer begins to see the infinite reflections of its own gaze. There is a stillness that comes when you begin to watch yourself thinking. It feels like stepping into a vast, dimly lit chamber where echoes return slower than expected. Every thought, every impulse, every image seems to ripple through that space, as if testing the distance between what arises and what is aware of it. Somewhere within that echo, the question begins to form again: who or what is doing the watching? Neuroscience gives one answer: a network of regions that quietly work together, crafting the illusion of a central observer. Among them, the default mode network, a constellation stretching from the medial prefrontal cortex to the posterior cingulate and angular gyrus, awakens when your attention turns inward. It activates when you recall the past, imagine the future, or contemplate yourself. You might call it your inner narrator, the quiet architect of autobiography. When this network hums, you experience continuity, the feeling that the same you who felt sorrow years ago is the one listening now. Yet the brain doesn't hold a permanent self, it reconstructs one each moment, like a storyteller retelling the same tale with new words every time. The self feels stable only because the story repeats quickly enough to blur the seams. You can sense this mechanism if you pay attention to your thoughts. A memory arises, an old room, a smell, a voice. Instantly a sense of I remember blooms. But if you look closely, that I wasn't there before the memory appeared. It emerged with the memory as part of the same wave. The observer and the observed arise together. In that recognition lies a gentle kind of wonder, the realization that you are built from fleeting events pretending to be permanents. Let's step deeper. Within your temporal lobes lie small almond-shaped regions called the amygdalae. They color your thoughts with emotion, deciding what matters. When you think about yourself, they ensure the image isn't just factual, it's felt. That feeling of ownership, of mine, is the emotional glue that binds your memories into identity. Without it, experience would scatter like light through glass, bright, beautiful, and impersonal. Now picture a moment when you are lost in awe, a sunset so vivid it made you forget your name, or music that silenced thought. During such moments, the default mode network quiets, the sense of a separate observer dissolves, the boundaries between seer and seen soften, and you become the act of awareness itself. Neuroscientists studying meditators have observed this. As the self-referential regions fall silent, other networks dedicated to sensory immersion rise in their place. The brain's story pauses, and experience flows unfiltered. Philosophers call this state non-dual awareness, but biologically it is simply the brain shifting modes from narration to presence, from prediction to perception. When the narrator returns, it translates the experience into language. I felt one with everything. Yet even that statement is a reflection added after the fact, a ripple across still water. This interplay, the mind weaving between being and describing, is the core rhythm of consciousness. Like breathing, it alternates. Inhale the world as raw sensation, exhale it as meaning. Without both, the psyche cannot live. Too much narration, and life becomes memory. Too much presence, and memory dissolves. Awareness requires both mirror and light. If you could visualize the process, you'd see waves of neural activity shimmering through your cortex, rising and fading in synchrony with thought. Each wave represents a pattern of meaning. When the waves calm, awareness remains silent, luminous without content. It's like the surface of a lake after a storm. The reflections return, but the water itself is unchanged. That stillness beneath the ripples is the essence of consciousness. Now, here's a paradox that science can measure but not yet explain. The neurons creating your experience are blind to it. They fire, connect, exchange chemicals, but they don't know they are doing it. Awareness emerges from their activity, yet is not contained in any single cell. It is the pattern itself, the dance, not the dancers. That means you are less a thing than a choreography, less an entity than an ongoing performance. This realization can be unsettling at first. The mind, accustomed to being the central figure, resists its own transparency. But notice what happens when you let the idea settle instead of fight it. If you are not a fixed self, then you are not confined either. You are process living, learning, changing in every moment. The self becomes not a noun but a verb. You don't have awareness, you are awareness moving through forms. Philosophically, this shifts everything. The ancient mystery of who am I transforms into what is happening when I appear as I. That second question doesn't seek an answer but a seeing, a recognition that the observer and the observed are one event viewed from two sides. The mirror is no longer just reflecting, it's participating. And yet, even as you understand this, the mind will continue rebuilding its familiar walls. It will reassert identity. I am this person, with this name, this story. That's natural. The brain needs stability to function in the world. But maybe now, when you catch your reflection in the glass, you'll notice the shimmer, the subtle knowledge that the one looking back is both real and imagined, built moment by moment out of light and memory. You might find comfort in this dance. If the self is a process, then mistakes can be rewritten, pain can be reframed, growth is always possible. The mirror of mind is not a prison, it's a canvas. Awareness paints itself new every instant, using the pigments of sensation, emotion, and thought. So sit with this awareness for a moment. Feel your breath enter and leave. Notice how the body moves without command, how thoughts arise and dissolve without effort. The observer is not separate from any of it. It's the field in which all of it occurs. When the mirror understands it's made of light, confusion fades into clarity. But even clarity casts a reflection. Somewhere beyond this recognition lies another question, softer but more persistent. If awareness can watch itself, can it ever see its own source? What lies behind the mirror when the light goes out? To answer that, we must step past the architecture of mind and into the mystery of consciousness itself, the place where observation folds back infinitely and the watcher disappears into what is being watched. There's a subtle tension that stirs when you begin to wonder what happens before awareness, before the watcher awakens. It feels like standing at the edge of a deep lake at night, knowing there's movement beneath the surface, yet seeing only the reflected stars. That surface, that seamless shifting layer, is your consciousness as you know it. The ripples are thoughts, the stars are sensations, and the water below hides what creates both. To explore this depth, imagine for a moment that you are once again before the mirror. You see your face, but now, instead of focusing on features, you focus on the act of seeing itself. Somewhere in that quiet shift of attention, something astonishing happens. The image softens, the sense of distance fades, and suddenly it feels as if you are both sides of the reflection at once, the one looking and the one being looked at. The distinction trembles, as though consciousness is catching itself in the act. Neuroscience can trace the outer edges of this moment, though not yet its heart. When subjects in meditation experiments report selfless awareness, their brain scans reveal a curious pattern: decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain's storytelling system, and increased coherence between attention and sensory areas. The brain stops rehearsing identity and begins to experience raw presence. In that state, there is perception without commentary, awareness without observer. It's not that the self vanishes entirely, it's that the machinery that insists on being a self grows quiet. To the meditator, the experience feels infinite but intimate, as though the entire field of reality has opened its eyes through them. For a scientist observing from the outside, it appears as rhythmic coordination between different brain waves, alpha and gamma oscillations, synchronizing across regions that usually compete for control. Consciousness, it seems, becomes unified when it stops trying to define itself. If the self is a process, then awareness is the canvas on which that process paints. You can think of your mind as both wave and ocean, each thought a crest that rises and falls, each emotion a tide that shifts the shoreline, yet the water beneath remains continuous. The reflection in the mirror changes with every ripple, but the lake never ceases to hold the sky. That continuity, awareness itself, is mysterious, precisely because it cannot be grasped as an object. You can't step outside it to see it, you can only be it. The moment you try to observe awareness directly, it slips into the background, and a new observer arises, a new reflection layered over the last, its recursion without end, an infinite feedback loop that defines consciousness by its own impossibility to find its edge. Philosophers have called this the hard problem, how subjective experience arises from physical matter, from neurons and synapses, somehow emerges the shimmering light of knowing. Each cell is blind, each molecule unconscious, yet together they produce the vivid world of thought, memory, and love. The scientific mind can map every pathway, but it still cannot say why the dance feels like something, why light becomes awareness. But perhaps the question itself contains a clue. Awareness, by nature, cannot look backward to find its source, because it is the source of looking. The mirror can't see what shines upon it, it can only reflect, so maybe consciousness doesn't emerge from matter in the way fire emerges from spark. Perhaps matter itself is one of consciousness's reflections. That thought may sound mystical, but it's echoed in modern theories too. Some physicists and neuroscientists propose that consciousness is not a byproduct but a fundamental property of the universe, a basic field like gravity, interacting with the brain's structure to create the personal experience of I am. In this view, your mind is a local mirror within a larger awareness, tuning to a frequency of existence already humming through everything. Whether you accept this or not, the experience of awareness points to something undeniably vast. You can feel it in silence, how the mind never truly stops being aware, even when there's nothing to be aware of. That quiet presence is what remains when thought dissolves, what watches even as dreams unfold, what waits when you sleep and returns the moment you wake. It's the background hum of being, steady and impartial, untouched by the images that flicker across it. This background awareness is what gives meaning to the brain's predictions, emotions, and reflections. Without it, there would be no mirror, no light, no image at all. It's the still point around which everything turns, the hidden constant of all perception. And though the brain's machinery enables it to manifest in human form, the experience itself feels larger than neurons can contain, like water taking the shape of a cup without belonging to it. Think of how this awareness flows through daily life. You read words on a page, and in each pause between sentences, there is awareness of reading. You walk down a crowded street, and somewhere, beneath the noise of thoughts, awareness simply notices, without judgment, without label. It doesn't need to claim or explain, it just is. That is the silent watcher, not separate from you, but not confined to you either. The paradox, of course, is that the moment you try to name it, it hides again. Awareness can't be grasped, it can only be lived. That's why mystics across centuries have described enlightenment not as gaining something new, but as remembering something constant. The mirror realizing it has always been clear beneath the dust of reflection. When this recognition dawns, even briefly, a deep calm follows. The world still moves, thoughts still rise, emotions still unfold, but none of them disturb the surface as they once did. The mirror no longer fears its own reflections. The self becomes transparent, and life flows through unresisted. And yet, this peace carries a new kind of curiosity. If awareness is universal, then why does each mind feel so private? Why do our reflections seem bound to single bodies, single histories, single fates? Is individuality an illusion, or is it awareness learning about itself from different angles? That question marks the next doorway, the moment when consciousness, having seen its own nature, begins to look outward again through human eyes, wondering how it ended up seeing this way. We'll walk through that doorway next, to explore how awareness takes form through body and brain, how flesh becomes instrument and perception becomes song. You breathe and your body answers. The chest rises, air moves in, the lungs expand. No thought is required. Before awareness names it, the act is already complete. This is the quiet genius of the body, a living instrument tuned by evolution to perform its symphony of survival without conductor or script. Yet somehow, through this automatic dance, awareness experiences itself as you. If the last mirror revealed the vast ocean of consciousness, this one brings the focus closer to the vessel through which that awareness becomes tangible. For in truth, the mind does not float above the body, it's woven through it, inseparable from the heartbeat that sustains it. The mirror of the self is not only mental, it's biological. Every cell hums with information about who you are. Consider how the brain knows where the body ends. Hidden within your muscles, joints, and skin are sensory receptors, tiny messengers that continuously update your brain about pressure, movement, temperature, and position. They feed data to the somatosensory cortex, a strip of tissue running ear to ear across your head. This is where the brain constructs the living map of you. If that map changes through injury, amputation, or illness, your sense of self shifts with it. Some people who lose a limb still feel it, as though it remains attached. The brain's body map doesn't erase easily. In this way, perception can cling to ghosts of sensation, proving that you is a neural creation as much as a physical one. But what keeps this map feeling real, moment by moment, is the dialogue between the body's signals and the brain's predictions. The brain doesn't simply receive sensations, it forecasts them, expecting a certain heartbeat, a certain temperature, a certain level of oxygen. When what it predicts matches what it feels, the sense of ownership deepens. When mismatch occurs, the world feels strange. This constant calibration between expectation and input is what scientists call interoception, your brain's awareness of the body's inner landscape. Pause and notice your breath again. The air feels cooler entering your nose than leaving it. Your pulse has its own quiet rhythm, your stomach its gentle movements. These sensations aren't random noise, they are the body speaking, and the brain listening. Most of the time, this conversation stays below awareness, like music you forget you're hearing. But when emotion stirs, when fear spikes your pulse or love softens it, suddenly you feel the dialogue more clearly. Emotion at its core is interoception made conscious, the brain sensing change in the body and interpreting it as meaning. Think of how anger heats you, how sadness weighs you, how anticipation quickens breath. Each is the body translating chemistry into story. Neurophysiologically, these sensations arise from the insula, a deep fold of cortex that integrates signals from organs and muscles. It turns the raw hum of biological life into the texture of subjective experience. You don't just think your emotions, you feel them because your body participates in the thought. The mirror then is no longer confined to glass or mind. It extends through muscle and marrow. Your body is the first reflection of awareness, the interface through which the abstract becomes alive. In every gesture, awareness tests its edges. In every heartbeat, it confirms that it's still here. To touch the world is to feel the echo of your own presence. But the connection runs both ways. Just as emotion changes perception, perception changes emotion. When you hold your shoulders open, your posture signals safety to the brain. Cortisol drops, serotonin rises. The body tells the mind it can trust the moment. This feedback loop explains why breathing slowly or standing tall can transform your state of mind. You are rewriting the prediction your brain makes about how safe or threatened you are. In extreme moments, panic, trauma, or deep meditation, this loop can break or expand. During panic, the body's signals flood the brain so intensely that prediction collapses. You feel lost inside your own physiology. In deep meditation, the opposite happens. The body's signals quiet until awareness experiences itself almost without anchor. Both are edges of the same mirror, the point where the boundary between physical and mental begins to blur. Now imagine what it means that your body continually rewrites your perception of self. When you are tired, the world appears heavier. When you are well rested, it glows with possibility. When you are ill, the self contracts. When you are in love, it expands. This is not poetic exaggeration, it's measurable. Brain imaging shows that metabolic states alter the strength of connections between the insula, prefrontal cortex, and amygdala, reshaping both emotion and self-awareness. You don't think yourself into being, you feel yourself into being. From this perspective, the old idea of mind over matter begins to dissolve. There is no over, there is only flow. The mind is what the body feels from within. The body is what the mind looks like from the outside. The two are mirrors facing each other, each sustaining the other's reflection. Philosophically, this realization humbles the notion of self. We tend to believe that awareness lives in the brain, like a pilot in a cockpit, steering the body. But the cockpit is the plane is the flight. Awareness is the movement itself, the body feeling, the mind interpreting, the two inseparable as flame and heat. So when you next feel overwhelmed, remember that emotion is not an intruder in thought, it's the foundation of it. The clarity you seek is not above the body, but through it. To calm the mind, you must listen to its oldest ally, the rhythm of breath, the pulse of heart, the warmth of being alive. These are not background details, they are the first language of consciousness. Let yourself feel the miracle of it, the body sensing, the brain predicting, the awareness that notices both. This is the emotional mirror in its most elemental form, the flesh reflecting the soul animating the flesh. And still, beneath all this living movement, a question lingers like a quiet tremor. If the body mirrors the mind, and the mind mirrors the body, who stands between them, holding the reflection steady? In the next part, we will step into that space, where emotion and perception merge so deeply that one begins to rewrite the other, and the self becomes as fluid as light upon water. You remember the first time you caught your reflection after a long night of worry or grief. It wasn't just tiredness you saw, it was distortion. The proportions of your face felt different, somehow foreign, as though emotion had rearranged the architecture of the world. In that moment, the mirror didn't just show your image, it showed your inner weather refracted outward. The emotional mirror doesn't need permission to alter what it reflects. When you feel anxious, neural signals from the amygdala heighten vigilance in your visual cortex, sharpening edges, amplifying contrast, searching for threat. When you feel sadness, the same pathways quiet down, making everything appear duller, slower, farther away. These adjustments happen automatically, long before awareness arrives. The mind paints mood into matter, turning emotion into light, and light back into belief. This is where distortion becomes more than temporary. When emotional bias loops long enough, the mirror begins to harden around it. The brain's predictions stop updating. Perception starts to orbit a fixed image of how I seem. This is the shadow territory of body dysmorphia, where the mirror's power to translate feeling into vision grows so absolute that even truth can't break through. Imagine standing before a mirror that whispers, "You are not enough." Each glance repeats the phrase until neurons themselves learn to anticipate it. The insula, your interoceptive hub, sends uneasy signals to the prefrontal cortex, and the brain confuses emotional discomfort with visual evidence. The reflection becomes a feedback loop of error correction gone wrong. Emotion alters sight, altered sight deepens emotion. Every look strengthens the circuitry of self-critique. The tragedy is that this isn't a delusion, it's devotion. The brain is trying to protect you from uncertainty, to stabilize identity. It prefers a painful certainty to a shapeless unknown. The mirror, though cruel, feels reliable, and reliability feels like safety. Neuroscientists studying dysmorphia find that when sufferers view their own faces, their brains light up differently, not in regions that process global shape, but in those that fixate on detail. The eyes don't see the whole, they hunt for imperfection. The fusiform gyrus, which normally registers faces holistically, quiets. In its place, the parietal lobes zoom in like microscopes. The result is a perceptual tunnel, a patchwork of flaws without context. Emotion fuels this hyperfocus, and the mirror confirms it. But you don't need a diagnosis to know the feeling. Everyone, at times, steps into this tunnel. The bad lighting, the critical mood, the mental list of what could be better. In those moments, you aren't seeing your face, you're seeing your state. The reflection becomes autobiography, not anatomy. What's in front of you is a canvas painted with expectation. Pause here and consider how perception itself conspires with emotion. The same neural systems that track external features also track internal ones. When you look at another person, your brain uses its mirror neurons to simulate their expression, their emotion. When you look at yourself, those same neurons activate again, this time generating the emotion your reflection suggests. A subtle half-smile can actually brighten your mood because your brain mistakes the reflection's movement for intention. But the opposite is also true. Frowning at your reflection can pull the entire network toward sadness. It's an exquisite irony. Your own face can manipulate your feeling as surely as another's can. The mirror becomes a conversation between two nervous systems sharing the same skull. Philosophically, this dynamic blurs cause and effect. Do you feel unattractive because your brain perceives asymmetry, or does your brain perceive asymmetry because you feel unattractive? Science leans toward the latter. Emotion shapes interpretation far more powerfully than geometry. Beauty in the brain is coherence, the alignment between what it expects and what it finds. When expectation and perception harmonize, the mind calls it beauty. When they clash, it calls it flaw. Understanding this changes everything. It means that your reflection is never evidence, it's feedback. The brain uses it not to tell you who you are, but to update its predictions about who you believe yourself to be. Each look becomes a training signal for identity. That's why kind perception isn't vanity, it's neuroplasticity. When you meet your reflection with gentleness, your brain rewires the way it predicts your face, slowly breaking the loop of criticism. There's a practice some therapists use with patients suffering from mirror anxiety. They call it mirror exposure, but it's not what you think. The goal isn't to examine the face, it's to breathe with it. You begin by standing before the glass, not judging or analyzing, but observing sensation, heartbeat, breath, warmth, tension. Gradually, the body and brain begin to sync again. The insula updates its map. This face is mine, and it is safe. Over time, the reflection becomes neutral again, a surface, not a verdict. If emotion can distort vision, it can also restore it. Gratitude, compassion, even mild curiosity, they all shift brain chemistry, broadening perceptual bandwidth. When serotonin rises, the visual cortex processes patterns more fluidly. When oxytocin flows, social and self-recognition networks strengthen. In these states, the mirror softens. The same face looks different, because the viewer does. Perhaps this is the hidden wisdom in the human desire for connection, that others act as corrective mirrors when our own become warped. The eyes of someone who loves you can override years of internal distortion. The nervous system entrains to their calm, and the brain, reassured, updates its prediction. Maybe I am not what I feared. Still, there's a deeper truth hidden within this fragility. The self that the mirror misrepresents is itself a construct of reflection. The distortion, painful as it may be, is built from the same mechanism that allows you to have any self-image at all. The mirror lies, but only because it learned from your mind's first truth that perception is prediction. And so, you stand before the glass, breathing. The features don't change, but their meaning does. The image ceases to accuse. it begins to inform. You see not flaw, not perfection, but process, light meeting expectation, body meeting mind. For the first time, the reflection feels less like judgment and more like conversation. You can almost hear it whisper back, softly, as if the glass itself were alive. You see what you believe, but you can also believe differently. In that gentle statement lies the seed of freedom, the realization that perception, once distorted, can be retrained, that the mirror, once cruel, can become kind. And yet a deeper layer still awaits. Because emotion and memory are woven tightly together, each reflection you see is haunted by the ghosts of all the faces you've ever been. Let's turn to those next, the memories that paint your reflection even when you think you're seeing the present. Imagine opening an old photograph of yourself. The image feels both intimate and foreign. You recognize the face, but not entirely. You remember the moment, but not its exact feeling. That quiet dissonance between familiarity and distance is the echo of memory, the unseen artist that keeps repainting your reflection. Memory is not an archive, it's a living studio. Each time you recall something, your brain doesn't retrieve a perfect file. It rebuilds the moment from fragments scattered across networks, visual cues in the occipital cortex, emotions in the amygdala, context in the hippocampus, meaning in the prefrontal lobes. Every recollection is a reconstruction, touched by the mood and state of the present. So the self you remember is not the self who lived, but the self your current mind imagines living. This means that when you see yourself in the mirror, you're not just looking at a body, you're looking through the lens of every memory your brain has woven about that body. The face you perceive is stitched with associations, moments of pride, embarrassment, desire, rejection, some bright, some dim, all subtly shaping how the glass feels when you meet it. Scientists have studied this phenomenon through what they call autobiographical memory recall bias. When participants recall positive experiences, brain activity increases in areas linked to visual clarity and brightness. Negative memories dull those same regions. In other words, remembering good times literally sharpens vision. Your memories tint not only your thoughts, but your eyes themselves. And because your memories of yourself are selective, your reflection becomes a mirror of selective truth. You might see the fatigue from past struggles more readily than the resilience that carried you through them. The brain gives heavier weight to emotionally charged memories, so pain etches itself deeper into your perception of who you are. It's not your imagination that old hurts still live in your face. It's your neurology replaying its own highlights of survival. If you could translate that process into an image, it would look like layers of translucent paint over a single portrait. The earliest strokes, childhood impressions of your face, your parents' comments, the glances of friends form the base coat. Over years, new layers appear. Love adds warmth, loss adds shadow, achievement adds light. The final image is never dry. Every new experience re-wets the paint. Philosophically, this means the self you see is temporal, not static. You are witnessing a memory in progress, a dynamic equilibrium between past and present. The you in the mirror is an event still unfolding, a film still being edited. Each morning, your brain revises the script slightly, sometimes tenderly, sometimes harshly. The mirror is merely where the latest draft appears. This rewriting happens even at the cellular level. The hippocampus, responsible for memory consolidation, is one of the few regions in the adult brain capable of growing new neurons. With every sunrise, new cells are born, offering the potential to alter old narratives. The neural architecture of your memories changes subtly each night as you sleep, which means the self that wakes is always a little different from the one who fell asleep. So when you feel nostalgic or unsettled while looking at your reflection, it's not vanity, it's time perception. You're sensing microseconds of history condensed into a single gaze. The amygdala contributes its emotional tone, the prefrontal cortex adds context, and together they overlay the present moment with ghosts of what was. The reflection becomes multidimensional. You're not just seeing your current face, but the entire archive of faces your mind remembers being. And because emotion and memory are intertwined, every recollection you bring into consciousness alters the next one. It's as if each remembered self leaves a fingerprint on the mirror, slightly changing how the next self will appear. Over decades, this layering becomes the texture of identity, the sense that you've aged, not just in skin, but in meaning. Sometimes, this process brings tenderness. You look into the mirror and see the child you once were, still living somewhere behind the eyes, waiting to be recognized. Other times, it brings grief, the faces of those you've lost reflected faintly in the curve of your expression. The mirror becomes a memorial, but also a bridge. Memory makes the reflection deeper because it fills it with story. There's a practical grace hidden in this realization. If your memories sculpt perception, then healing them can change how you see yourself. Psychologists call this reconsolidation therapy, inviting the brain to recall painful memories in safe conditions so that new emotional associations overwrite the old. In essence, it teaches the nervous system to repaint the past with softer colors. The next time you face the mirror after such work, the difference isn't in the light, it's in the narrative. The reflection feels lighter because the memory behind it has been rewritten. But there's an even subtler kind of memory at play, procedural memory, the body's remembrance of movement and posture, the way you hold your shoulders, the micro-expression you make when uncertain, the tilt of your head, all of it encoded over years by repetition. These patterns are stored not in the hippocampus, but in the cerebellum and basal ganglia. They are the body's handwriting, signatures left by habit and history. When you see yourself, your mind recognizes those signatures before it recognizes your face. That's why even a blurred reflection can still feel unmistakably you. In this sense, the body becomes the oldest diary you possess. The way you stand, smile, or frown is your nervous system quoting itself, lines written long ago in the grammar of muscle and nerve. Every movement tells a story about how you learned to exist. To meet your reflection is to read those stories aloud. So perhaps the next time you see yourself, you might do so with curiosity instead of critique. Ask what memories the body is retelling. Notice the traces of endurance, the gestures learned from love, the small courage in the way you hold your gaze. The mirror doesn't only show what you are, it shows what you've survived to remain visible. And beneath all that memory, another question waits quietly, almost shy. If your reflection is the sum of all you remember, what happens to it when you forget? What remains when the stories fade, when the brain can no longer assemble the self from its scattered pieces? That question leads us to the next paradox, the fragile link between recognition and memory, and what happens when the mirror itself forgets the face it reflects. The mirror greets you again as faithfully as always, but this time it feels different. The light hasn't changed, nor has your face, yet something beneath recognition trembles, a subtle question hiding behind the image. How do I know this is me? Recognition, it turns out, is not a single act, but a choreography of memory, emotion, and expectation. Each time you meet your reflection, your brain performs an intricate verification dance, comparing the incoming visual data to stored templates of your own face. When the match is close enough, the prefrontal cortex gives a quiet nod of approval. Yes, this belongs to me. But that yes depends on memory's accuracy, and memory, as you know, is never perfect. Deep within your temporal lobes lies the fusiform face area, a region specialized for facial recognition. It's what allows you to pick your own image out of a crowd, and what makes familiar faces spark warmth while strangers trigger neutrality or caution. Yet this same system is fragile. When its delicate wiring misfires, something remarkable and disorienting happens. People with a rare condition called prosopagnosia can see faces clearly, even describe them, but cannot recognize them. They must rely on voice, gait, or clothing to identify loved ones. In essence, the mirror still works, but the sense of self it should evoke is missing. There's a mirror world version of this phenomenon too, Capgras delusion. Here the face is recognized perfectly, but the emotional signal that normally accompanies recognition fails to appear. The result, the person insists that loved ones, or even their own reflection, are imposters. The eyes deliver truth, but the feeling of familiarity generated by the limbic system does not arrive. Without that feeling, the image becomes alien. Recognition requires not just data but affection. And so we learn that the self, as perceived, depends as much on emotional resonance as on visual detail. Your brain doesn't confirm identity by shape alone, it confirms it by warmth. Each time you see yourself, a small emotional pulse passes through you. Too subtle to notice, like the brain whispering, "Still me, still here." But what happens when that whisper grows faint, when the emotional echo fades? In neurodegenerative illnesses like Alzheimer's, that verification dance falters. Some patients can still see their reflection, but fail to connect it with their inner identity. They speak to the mirror as if it housed another person, someone eerily similar. To them, the image feels real but separate, a visitor occupying familiar skin. This is not madness, it's a fracture in the dialogue between perception and memory. The mirror has forgotten its emotional instructions. Even in healthy minds, small versions of this forgetting occur. After deep emotional change, grief, trauma, recovery, many people report looking at their reflection and feeling disoriented, as if the face hasn't kept up with the soul. Neuroscience would call this a mismatch error between updated self-concept and stored visual template. Philosophically, it's a quiet existential moment. The brain realizes it's been updating the inner story faster than the body can display it. The result is a haunting sense of displacement, the mirror catching up to who you've become. Yet, this same mechanism also allows transformation. When you adopt new habits or heal old wounds, the emotional circuits gradually relearn how to respond to your image. Over time, warmth replaces confusion, the fusiform face area reconnects with the amygdala, and the emotional signal, "Yes, it's me and I am safe," strengthens again. The mirror regains its trust. It's fascinating that the brain's sense of recognition depends so heavily on feedback from others. As infants, we first learn who we are through caregivers' eyes. The mirror neurons in our premotor cortex fire when we watch someone else express emotion, teaching our nervous system to feel from the outside in. Over years, that external feedback becomes internalized. We learn to recognize ourselves by replaying the emotional patterns that others once reflected to us. Your first mirror was not glass, it was another human face. That's why, when self-recognition falters, connection can repair it. The eyes of someone who truly sees you can rewire the neurons that forgot. The brain circuits of familiarity begin to glow again under the influence of empathy. In that light, the mirror no longer feels cold or distant, it becomes communal, shared. And this insight opens a tender paradox. The self is both private and public. You are shaped not only by how you perceive yourself, but also by how others perceive you. Their reflections of you fill in the blind spots your own mirror cannot show. The brain trusts these social reflections as extensions of its own model, updating self-image in response to collective feedback. But this dependence carries a shadow. If your sense of self becomes too tied to external validation, the mirror's bias shifts outward. You begin to chase reflections in other people's eyes. Approval, recognition, belonging. The glass that once held your image now holds their expectations. Slowly, subtly, the emotional anchor of identity drifts. The neuroscience of this drift is sobering. Social rejection or loss activates the same brain regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex, which normally integrates emotional and bodily signals, interprets social exclusion as injury. The mirror becomes scarred with absence. You see not your reflection, but the outline of connection that's missing. And yet, even here, awareness holds a quiet power. Just as the brain can be wounded by reflection, it can also be healed by it. Compassion, both received and given, reshapes the neural pathways that determine how you recognize yourself. When you look at your reflection with the same empathy you might offer another, you engage those same mirror neurons, retraining the brain to link sight with safety again. The next time you face the mirror, pause. Notice whether the image feels near or far. Notice whether recognition feels warm or uncertain. In that instant, you're not just seeing your face, you're measuring the current strength of your connection between memory and emotion, self and world. The reflection is diagnostic. It reveals how clearly you still remember your belonging. And if belonging can fade, it can also return. Recognition, after all, is nothing more than memory finding its way home. But the mirror's dialogue with others doesn't end there. If your sense of self is partly built from social reflection, then every relationship you've ever had is a fragment of your inner mirror. In the next section, we'll turn toward those social reflections, the countless invisible mirrors that surround you, shaping who you believe yourself to be. Every life unfolds inside an invisible hall of mirrors, the eyes of others. From the first moments of infancy, when a parent's gaze meets yours and reflects warmth or tension, your nervous system begins to learn what it means to exist. Before you have a name, before you understand words, you already understand reflection. The smile on another's face lights up the reward centers of your tiny brain. Their frown tightens your pulse. You learn that who you are can be mirrored back in tone, expression, and touch. The social reflection becomes the earliest version of identity. This exchange continues, quietly, for the rest of your life. Each encounter, every nod of approval, every glance of disinterest, sends microscopic signals through your body. A part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex measures these cues as emotional temperature, translating social acceptance into safety and rejection into threat. This is not metaphor, it's physiology. The same neural circuits that register physical pain also respond to social disconnection. Loneliness, then, is not an absence of company, it's the body's cry that the mirrors have gone dark. When you walk through the world, you are constantly reflected in others. You adjust posture, tone, and even micro-expressions based on these reflections, often without awareness. The superior temporal sulcus, a brain region specialized in reading facial movement, picks up on subtle shifts in others' reactions and adjusts your behavior within fractions of a second. It's a loop of social prediction. Your brain guesses what others see in you and edits itself to match. Through this, your public self is born, a version of you sculpted by social light. Yet this social mirror is double-edged. It grants empathy, connection, and belonging, but also comparison, insecurity, and conformity. When you look at your reflection in glass, you may see not just your face, but the accumulation of every gaze that ever evaluated it. Approval and disapproval linger like fingerprints on the mirror's surface. The reflection becomes crowded, layered with memory. Science captures this in a concept called reflected self-appraisal, your perception of how others perceive you. In experiments, when participants imagine being watched, regions in their brain associated with self-evaluation, the medial prefrontal cortex, light up more intensely. This means that the idea of being seen changes the way the brain processes identity, even when no one is actually watching. The mirror inside your mind is social by design. But what happens when society becomes the main mirror? When the eyes of others overshadow the inner gaze, you begin to lose resolution of your true image. The noise of external reflection drowns out the subtler voice of internal awareness. You become an echo chamber of expectations, polishing the surface that the world approves of while neglecting the depth beneath. The self becomes performance, the mirror becomes stage lighting, and authenticity flickers like a backstage whisper. And yet, the social mirror has its own wisdom. It reminds you that the self is not solitary. Your identity is an ecosystem of relationships, each person reflecting back a different facet of you. One friend reveals your humor, another your patience, another your vulnerability. Together they form a mosaic of perception. Without them, you would still exist, but less vividly, like a sculpture never touched by light. In moments of true empathy, these mirrors align. Your brain's mirror neuron system clusters in the premotor cortex, and inferior parietal lobe activates not only when you perform an action, but when you watch someone else perform it. When you see another person smile, your neurons rehearse that smile internally, producing a miniature echo of their emotion. This is why connection feels physical. It's not imagined resonance, it's shared neural choreography. Through this resonance, you begin to realize that seeing and being seen are not opposites but continuations of one loop. Every expression you read in another is partly your own reflection. The compassion you feel for someone else travels the same pathways that once taught you to recognize yourself. Empathy, at its core, is the mirror turning outward. Yet empathy also carries fatigue. When you spend too long absorbing the emotions of others, the boundary between self and reflection blurs. The brain's insula, overwhelmed by emotional data, struggles to distinguish where you end and they begin. Compassion without rest becomes identification, reflection becomes absorption. This is why solitude matters. It allows the inner mirror to clear, to rediscover its own surface beneath the imprints of the world. Philosophically, the social mirror reveals the paradox of individuality. You are both utterly unique and entirely relational. Every aspect of your personality has roots in interaction, the accent of your voice, the rhythm of your gestures, the vocabulary of your emotions. Even your private thoughts are written in a language you learned from others. The mind is not an isolated chamber, it's an open courtyard of dialogues past and present. To see this clearly is to feel both humility and connection. Humility, because your self-image depends on others in ways you can't control. Connection, because this dependence means that empathy is not optional, it's structural. The very circuits that give you a sense of I are also the circuits that let you feel we. Perhaps this is why genuine connection feels sacred. It temporarily dissolves the illusion of separation. In a deep conversation, in laughter, in shared silence, the boundaries between two nervous systems blur. The mirror no longer reflects, it merges. For a brief moment, you see yourself not as a single reflection, but as part of a wider consciousness shimmering through countless eyes. And then, inevitably, the boundaries return. You pull back into individuality, into your private mirror, carrying traces of others with you, like starlight clinging to water. The social reflections fade, but their impressions remain, shaping how you'll see yourself the next time you meet your gaze in glass. In the next section, we'll follow this thread further into the age of digital mirrors, where technology multiplies our reflections infinitely, offering more visibility than ever before, but also more distortion. What happens when the mirror no longer needs glass and the reflection is shared with the entire world? The mirrors have multiplied. They now live in your pocket, on your desk, in the soft glow that follows you from room to room. Every screen that lights up with your image is another surface reflecting your existence back to you, instant, editable, amplified. You no longer meet your reflection only in solitude. Now the world joins you there. When you open the front-facing camera, there's a pause, a split second before the brain adjusts to the strange familiarity of your digital twin. It's your face, but rendered in pixels, sharpened by algorithms, colored by light that isn't quite natural. Your brain recognizes it, but your emotional circuits hesitate. That flicker of hesitation is modern dissonance, the nervous system grappling with a new kind of mirror, one that obeys no laws of intimacy or delay. This mirror is social, infinite, and unblinking. The old one in the bathroom waited for you to approach. The new one pursues you. It watches, records, replays. Every angle becomes a choice, every choice a signal to others. What began as reflection has become performance. From a neurological perspective, each act of self-presentation online activates the same circuits involved in self-recognition, the medial prefrontal cortex, but adds a new player, the striatum, the brain's reward center. Each like or comment releases small bursts of dopamine, momentarily reinforcing the identity you've constructed. Over time, this loop becomes a digital limbic system, emotion outsourced to feedback. You post an image, the world mirrors it back, and your sense of self subtly rearranges around the response. Approval brightens the reflection, silence dims it. You begin to predict reactions even before posting, tailoring your self-expression to anticipated reflection. The mirror no longer shows who you are, it shows who you believe the audience will recognize. It's easy to mistake this adaptation for authenticity, but the brain doesn't see the difference. Its reward networks simply learn the rhythm, action, reflection, reinforcement. The same predictive coding that once helped you navigate physical space now governs social space. Your self-model expands to include not only your body, but your digital presence, another map your neurons must constantly update. Yet this new mirror introduces distortions the brain wasn't designed to process. In physical reality, mirrors invert only left and right. In digital reality, they can invert meaning. A gesture intended as honest can be interpreted as boastful. A vulnerability can appear curated. The brain, craving coherence, struggles to reconcile these contradictory reflections. Studies show that heavy social media use increases activation in regions associated with self-evaluation and anxiety. The mind, bombarded by mirrors, loses its stable anchor. There's also the paradox of visibility, to be seen everywhere yet feel unseen. The mirror of technology offers constant recognition, but shallow intimacy. The anterior cingulate cortex, which once measured social belonging through real human gaze, cannot fully translate virtual attention into emotional safety. You may have thousands of reflections, likes, comments, followers, but the nervous system still hungers for the warmth of a single, present look. And yet, there's something profoundly human in our fascination with these mirrors. They amplify an ancient drive to understand ourselves through others' eyes. For centuries, art served that function. Portraits, poems, letters. Now the tools have changed, but the yearning remains. Every post, every photo, every message is an attempt to say, I exist, do you see me truly? Philosophically, these new mirrors reveal the fragility of selfhood in the age of perpetual reflection, when every moment can be captured, replayed, and judged. Identity becomes fluid, even strategic. The self turns into a curator of its own mythology, but behind that curation lies exhaustion, the weariness of maintaining coherence across infinite reflections. The more you try to fix your image, the more it fragments. Some neuroscientists suggest that the human brain evolved to manage a limited number of social connections, perhaps around 150, the so-called Dunbar number. Beyond that, the circuitry that supports empathy and memory begins to strain. The digital mirror, however, invites thousands of simultaneous reflections. Each one requires a small recalibration of the self-model. The result is cognitive fatigue. the brain trying to hold too many versions of me at once. But the solution isn't rejection, it's awareness. The same consciousness that adapts to mirrors can learn to navigate them. When you scroll through images of others, notice how your perception shifts. The brain automatically engages its comparative circuits, weighing similarity and difference. This is natural. It's how we locate ourselves in the social map. But you can choose to step back, to witness the process rather than drown in it. That small act of noticing begins to restore balance, the observer returning behind the reflection. Remember that each reflection, digital or physical, is partial. None can capture the entire you. The light that touches the screen misses the warmth of your voice, the rhythm of your thought, the texture of your kindness. The self that technology shows is a translation, not a truth. Recognizing this doesn't diminish you, it frees you. You can participate in the mirrors of the world without mistaking them for home. Perhaps the next evolution of consciousness will not be about having fewer reflections, but learning to remain whole within them. To look at your digital self and remember the living body beneath the pixels. To receive feedback without surrendering identity. To let the mirror serve its purpose, to reflect, not to define. When you turn off the screen, notice the after-image that lingers behind your eyes. That faint glow is not just retinal, it's psychological. The mirror has imprinted you again, but if you wait a few breaths, the glow fades, and what remains is silence. That silence is where the real reflection begins, the one untouched by algorithms, the one that belongs only to awareness itself. And yet, even silence has echoes, because awareness doesn't stop at individuality, it resonates with every other mind. The next mirror we approach is not made of glass or code, it's the mirror of empathy itself, the reflection of others within you. You've seen how mirrors can multiply until they surround you, physical, mental, digital. But there's another mirror that exists long before any technology and remains long after every screen goes dark. It lives inside your neurons, in circuits older than language. It is the mirror that allows you to feel someone else's joy as if it were your own, or flinch when you see another person's pain. It is empathy, the oldest and most intimate reflection of all. When you watch someone smile, your own brain quietly mirrors the movement. The premotor cortex activates as though you were smiling yourself. When someone's eyes fill with tears, subtle signals pass through your insular and anterior cingulate cortex, reproducing a trace of their sorrow in your own body. These are mirror neurons, discovered accidentally by neuroscientists observing macaque monkeys. The cells fired, both when the monkeys performed an action and when they merely observed another doing the same. The discovery revealed a stunning truth. The brain does not fully distinguish between self and other. To witness is to participate. This neural mirroring is the foundation of connection. It allows infants to mimic caregivers' expressions before they understand meaning, learning comfort and danger from the tone of a voice, the curve of a smile. As adults, the same mechanism makes empathy visceral rather than intellectual. You don't think compassion, you feel it. The nervous system experiences another's state and weaves it into your own awareness, creating a shared emotional field. Yet, like all mirrors, empathy distorts as easily as it reveals. Too little mirroring, and the world feels cold and fragmented. Too much, and boundaries blur until you carry others' emotions as your own. Empathy, without balance, becomes absorption. The same circuits that make kindness possible can, when overstimulated, produce fatigue or burnout. Nurses, therapists, and caregivers often experience this, what neuroscience calls empathic distress. Their mirror neurons stay too active for too long, flooding the system with unprocessed resonance. The key lies in modulation, the ability to mirror without merging. Studies show that compassion meditation alters brain activity in remarkable ways. When seasoned practitioners witness suffering, they activate regions linked not only to empathy, but also to positive affect, like the ventral striatum. Their brains generate a sense of warmth and connection rather than collapse. This shift from empathic pain to compassionate presence is what allows the mirror to remain clear. Think of the mirror as a lens that can either reflect suffering or refract it into understanding. When you balance awareness of another's pain with a stable sense of self, the neural resonance transforms. The same electrical patterns that could spiral into exhaustion instead form coherence, what researchers describe as synchronized compassion. It's empathy without erosion. Philosophically, this balance hints at something profound, that individuality and unity are not opposites but partners. To feel another's experience without losing your own is to discover that the border between self and world is porous, not broken. You are both observer and participant, reflection and light. If you trace this mechanism back far enough, it becomes more than biology. It becomes the root of morality itself. The recognition that your pain is my pain emerges not from philosophy, but from physiology. Morality begins as sensation. Our species' survival has always depended on this shared mirroring, cooperation, trust, the subtle choreography of empathy that turns isolated beings into community. And yet, empathy can be hijacked. In-group bias, our tendency to mirror those who resemble us more closely, is also born from these circuits. The same mirror neurons that foster compassion can fall silent when difference is perceived. Neuroscience reveals that when people view faces from unfamiliar groups, their empathic response is initially weaker, but awareness can override instinct. When the prefrontal cortex engages, empathy expands. The mirror learns to reflect more than similarity, it learns to reflect humanity. So empathy, in its purest form, is an act of training the mirror. It's awareness learning to widen its frame. Each time you choose to see another's experience as your own, your neural pathways reconfigure, softening the line between me and you. Compassion becomes a form of neuroplasticity, the brain's way of sculpting unity from difference. Now picture what happens when two people truly connect. Their breathing synchronizes, heart rhythms align, even tiny micro-movements of pupils and posture fall into rhythm. Scientists call this interpersonal coherence. Two nervous systems form a temporary circuit, a living mirror loop. Within it, both individuals experience safety, trust, and belonging. Awareness passes between them, like light through glass, unchanged yet shared. It's a state the brain recognizes as deeply rewarding. Oxytocin levels rise, cortisol drops, and the vagus nerve, a bridge between body and emotion, signals calm. This is the biological signature of empathy fulfilled, not exhaustion, but equilibrium. The mirror, when clear, doesn't drain, it illuminates. But even light casts a shadow. When empathy deepens, it awakens an even stranger reflection, the awareness that what you feel for another might also reveal something about yourself. The joy you celebrate in them echoes the joy you've known or long for. The pain you sense in them resonates with your own hidden wounds. In every act of empathy, you meet fragments of yourself disguised as others. This realization can be transformative. It invites humility and tenderness. The person you comfort mirrors your own potential for suffering. The person who comforts you mirrors your capacity to heal. The world becomes a web of mutual reflection, each consciousness polishing the others. And then, if you follow this empathy to its farthest edge, another question appears. Quiet, luminous, inescapable. If every reflection arises from the same awareness mirrored through countless forms, then where does the boundary of the self truly end? We'll step toward that question next, into the realm where observation itself becomes circular, where the watcher, the reflection, and the light are all facets of the same mystery. You are still before the mirror, though now it seems to shimmer with all the lives it has shown. The boundaries between your reflection and the worlds have thinned, as if empathy has softened the edges of individuality itself. The image no longer belongs entirely to you. It's threaded with echoes of others, their gestures, their laughter, their pain. The mirror doesn't just return your gaze anymore, it remembers every gaze you've ever met. At this point in our journey, a question forms like condensation on the glass. If empathy lets you feel another's emotion as your own, what happens when awareness reflects awareness? When consciousness observes consciousness, what is actually being mirrored? Neuroscience gives us a clue. The same circuits that light up when you witness another person's emotions, the mirror neuron system, also activate when you reflect on your own inner state. The brain uses the same biological mirror for both self and other. That means self-awareness is empathy turned inward. Empathy is self-awareness extended outward. You are the observer and the observed, the reflection and the reflector, looping endlessly through the same neural choreography. This loop forms what cognitive scientists call recursive consciousness. It's the mind's ability not only to experience, but to know that it's experiencing, to create a mental model of itself. It's how you can think, I am thinking, or feel, I am feeling sad. Without recursion, awareness would be a pure silent field with no capacity for self-recognition. The mirror would reflect the world but never realize it was shining. But recursion brings paradox. The more the mind reflects upon itself, the more complex its reflections become. Each layer of awareness, thinking about thinking, noticing the thought about thinking, creates another mirror. Somewhere along the way, the reflections begin to multiply faster than they can stabilize, creating that dizzying sense of depth you feel when you ask, "Who am I, really?" This is the consciousness-reflection paradox. Awareness is both the mirror and the light it reflects. It exists only when it looks at itself, yet in looking, it changes what it sees. The observer gives birth to the observed. Consider how this plays out in daily life. When you're lost in an activity, painting, running, listening to music, you vanish for a while. Awareness becomes transparent, no longer preoccupied with itself. The mirror reflects only what's before it. Neuroscientists call this flow state, the temporary quieting of self-referential circuits, allowing pure engagement. In those moments, you feel most alive precisely because the you who usually comments on experience steps aside. Then, when the activity ends, the self returns and says, "That was amazing." The commentator reclaims the story. The mirror resumes reflecting itself, as if awareness had briefly forgotten it existed, and then woke to find it had been present all along. The cycle between immersion and reflection defines consciousness. Too much reflection and you fragment, caught in analysis, worry, self-consciousness. Too little and you lose coherence, drifting like an untethered wave. The art of living may simply be learning to move gracefully between the two, to know when to see and when to be. Science can describe the mechanics of this, but not its meaning. When awareness turns fully upon itself, something ineffable appears, the sense of witnessing the act of witnessing. It's like standing between two facing mirrors and seeing reflections stretch to infinity, each smaller, each more fragile, until they dissolve into light. That endless regression is not a flaw of perception, it's the signature of consciousness recognizing its own boundlessness. Philosophers from many traditions have reached this same edge. Some call it the void, others pure awareness, others simply the mirror mind. They describe it as a state beyond subject and object, where the distinction between seeing and being seen evaporates. Modern neuroscience touches its perimeter in studies of advanced meditators. When these practitioners report unity or oneness, their brain scans show a synchronized quiet between regions responsible for self-location and perspective. The parietal lobes, normally tasked with drawing the line between me and world, fall silent. Awareness stops measuring distance. It becomes what it observes. In this state, empathy transcends emotion. It becomes identity. The suffering of another is not felt for them. It's felt as if it were your own, because at that level of awareness it is. This isn't metaphor. It's an expansion of self-recognition beyond the skin. The mirror neuron system, which once fired only for familiar gestures, now resonates with the entire human condition. You might recall moments when this happens spontaneously, watching a stranger cry, hearing a piece of music that feels like your own heart speaking through another voice. In those instants, awareness folds back on itself, recognizing that what it feels in another is what it has always contained. The mirror realizes there was never a separation to begin with. But the paradox persists. As soon as awareness names this unity, calls it peace, love, or transcendence, the mirror solidifies again. The self returns, eager to describe what can't be described. Words become frames trying to contain light. Still, something from that glimpse lingers. You move through life a little differently afterward, gentler, slower, aware that every reflection you meet is another angle of the same consciousness. The line between empathy and identity has blurred, replaced by quiet recognition that too is me. In this new understanding, even conflict changes meaning. The anger you see in another becomes a mirror for the anger you carry unacknowledged. The beauty you admire outside is the radiance of your own potential. The world stops being a theater of separate actors and becomes a hall of reflections, each calling awareness back to itself. And yet, there's one more layer left to explore. If awareness can dissolve boundaries until only unity remains, what happens when that unity cracks? When the self that once felt infinite suddenly fractures under pain, trauma, or loss, can the mirror once shattered ever be made whole again? That question leads us into the next reflection, the fractured mirror, where consciousness learns not only how it unites but how it breaks, and how even broken glass can still catch the light. There are moments when the mirror doesn't simply reflect, it shatters. A loud sound, a loss, a trauma, a betrayal. Something happens that the mind cannot integrate, and the smooth continuity of self splinters into fragments. You may still see your reflection, but it no longer feels coherent. It looks like you, but doesn't belong to you. This is the fractured mirror, the moment when awareness itself begins to question its shape. The fracture can arrive suddenly or creep in over time. After deep shock or pain, you might catch your reflection and feel a disconnect, as if the face looking back belongs to a stranger who wears your memories. That subtle alienation has a name in psychology: dissociation. The neural networks that normally bind sensation, emotion, and identity lose their synchronization. The insular and anterior cingulate cortex, once harmonized, drift apart. The body's signals arrive, but the emotional resonance fails. The mind retreats from its own mirror to protect itself from breaking entirely. Dissociation is the brain's emergency exit. It allows the system to endure what feels unbearable by splitting awareness into separate rooms, one that experiences and one that observes. You may function, speak, even smile, but somewhere behind the eyes a silence hums where connection should be. It's not numbness, it's distance, a survival adaptation written in the language of neurons. In the amygdala, the brain's alarm bell, threat detection spikes during trauma. But in chronic stress, another region, the prefrontal cortex, steps in to dampen that alarm, creating an artificial calm. This neurological duet keeps you alive at a cost. Your sense of self becomes partitioned. The mirror still stands, but the reflection flickers. You recognize the image yet feel nothing toward it. And sometimes the fracture goes deeper still. In depersonalization or derealization, even the sense of existing as a person can waver. The world looks too vivid, too distant, too dreamlike. You might stare at your hands and think, these are mine, but they don't feel like mine. The brain, overloaded by emotion, detaches from both mirror and light. The result is eerie neutrality, a defense against pain that masquerades as peace. Science can trace the circuitry of this fragmentation, but understanding its experience requires tenderness. The self breaks not out of weakness, but out of an ancient reflex. When the system cannot fight or flee, it freezes. This freeze is the stillness of a mirror in the dark, waiting for light it can bear to reflect again. Healing begins when light returns gently, when the nervous system learns that safety is possible once more. Therapies rooted in integration aim to reconnect the divided networks, to bring sensation back into conversation with emotion, and emotion back into memory. Practices like mindfulness, EMDR, or somatic experiencing don't force the mirror to mend, they invite its fragments to remember their unity. Slowly awareness expands to hold both the pain and the one who feels it. The self reassembles not by forgetting the fracture, but by including it. Imagine this process as gathering shards of glass from the floor, each one reflecting a slightly different angle of the same light. As you lift them, you realize the mirror's wholeness doesn't depend on seamlessness. The cracks, once illuminated, refract light in new ways. They become prisms. The self that re-emerges after shattering is not the same as before. It's wider, more compassionate, capable of seeing beauty in imperfection. Philosophically, this is where awareness meets resilience. If consciousness is the capacity to reflect, then healing is the courage to reflect everything, even what was once unbearable. The fracture reveals something that wholeness hid. That light does not need a flawless surface to shine. The Japanese art of kintsugi repairs broken pottery with gold, highlighting the cracks instead of concealing them. The repaired vessel becomes more valuable because it has been broken. The human mind heals in the same way. Integration is not restoration, it's transformation. When trauma shatters the mirror, the pieces don't vanish. They scatter through memory and body. Flashbacks, triggers, and numbness are not failures of strength but signals from those fragments calling for reintegration. Every trembling heartbeat, every moment of re-engagement with the present is a shard returning home. The amygdala quiets, the prefrontal cortex regains its rhythm, and the inner reflection brightens once more. But even as science maps this process, something deeper stirs beneath it, a spiritual resonance. The experience of breaking, painful as it is, often becomes the gateway to a more profound understanding of self. When the illusion of solidity collapses, what remains is awareness itself, still intact, still observing. You realize that even when identity fractures, consciousness endures. The mirror may break, but the light it reflects is unbreakable. Perhaps this is why survivors of deep trauma sometimes speak of finding unexpected clarity, a sense of expansion, even grace. They describe living closer to the raw essence of being, where pretense falls away and presence feels more real. The mind, having touched its own edge, understands fragility as sacred. Still, integration is not a straight line. Healing requires oscillation, approaching pain, then retreating to safety, again and again until the nervous system learns that both can coexist. Each wave of re-encounter strengthens coherence between brain and body. Gradually, the mirror reflects without shattering. The cracks remain, but they no longer threaten to split you apart. So when you see your reflection after hardship, notice how it gleams differently. There's a depth to the eyes that wasn't there before, a quiet knowing that only brokenness can teach. You might even feel a strange gratitude, not for the wound itself, but for the light it let in. And yet, the story of the fractured mirror isn't just about pain, it's about choice. Once you know the mirror can break and mend, you gain a kind of freedom. You no longer fear reflection. You can stand before it, even in imperfection, and recognize yourself as process, not product. From here, we'll step into that recognition. The acceptance that every reflection, clear or cracked, is part of one ongoing act of becoming. Because in the end, it's not the mirror's condition that defines you, but the light you continue to reflect. You stand before the mirror again, but now the fear of its fracture has softened. The cracks you once dreaded no longer feel like flaws. They glimmer faintly, catching the light in unexpected ways. What was once broken has become transparent, allowing you to see through the surface into something deeper. You begin to understand that identity is not about perfection, it's about permeability. The mirror was never meant to be solid, it was meant to breathe. Every moment of your life has left a trace here. Joy, pain, confusion, love. Each emotion etched a new line, like veins in marble. The mind, over time, has learned to read these markings as self. But now, in this new awareness, you see them differently, not as scars, but as the script of your becoming. Neuroscience describes this process beautifully through neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to change itself. Each new experience, each moment of attention, lays down a new pattern of connectivity. The self, then, is not a fixed sculpture, but a living ecosystem of pathways, pruning and growing, fading and flourishing. Healing, learning, and even identity shifts are not metaphors, they're physiological events. The mirror reorganizes itself continually, aligning to the light it receives. After trauma or transformation, the brain engages a process called reconsolidation. Old memories, once rigid, can be reactivated and rewritten with new emotional context. It's as if each shard of the fractured mirror can be dipped in fresh gold and set in place again. You do not erase the past, you teach it how to belong to the present. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that narrates who you are, learns to reinterpret. It weaves new meaning around old pain, finding coherence where once there was chaos. This is not illusion, it's integration. Meaning is the nervous system's way of harmonizing contradiction, of ensuring that even the darkest reflections contribute to the greater symmetry of self. You can sense this process happening not just in thought, but in feeling. The tightness that once gripped your chest begins to loosen, the body remembers safety, the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch that governs calm, awakens, telling your heart it may beat freely again. The vagus nerve carries this message upward to the mind. You can rest now, you survived. That quiet message transforms perception. When the body stops bracing against life, the mirror clears. You begin to perceive not through fear, but through acceptance. Colors seem gentler, time slower. The reflection no longer demands to be fixed or understood. It simply is, and in that simplicity, awareness expands. There's a profound paradox here. The more the mirror allows its cracks to remain visible, the more light it gathers. The mind, when it stops defending itself, becomes translucent. Neuroscientists studying resilience note this phenomenon. Those who've experienced deep loss often show increased connectivity between emotional and cognitive centers. Their brains become more integrative, less reactive. Pain, metabolized through reflection, turns into wisdom. This transformation echoes across ancient philosophy. In Taoist thought, the sage is not unbreakable, but fluid, yielding like water that shapes mountains through persistence, not force. In Buddhist terms, the realization of impermanence is not despair but liberation, the understanding that change is the very condition for renewal. The brain agrees. Plasticity thrives on change. The self survives because it adapts. Perhaps that is the hidden function of suffering, to remind the mirror that it is made of flexible glass, not stone. The mind learns to bend, not by avoiding reflection, but by entering it fully, even when it hurts. In that surrender, identity shifts from a noun to a verb, from I am to I am becoming. You can test this yourself. The next time you meet your gaze in the mirror, try not to identify with the image. Instead, notice the act of noticing. Feel how perception happens on its own, how awareness arises before thought, before language. The reflection is only the outer surface of a deeper observation taking place. You are not the face nor the observer, you are the space in which both appear. This realization brings serenity. The cracks lose their story. The light that filters through them is neither yours nor the mirror's. It belongs to something larger, the field of consciousness itself, endlessly reflecting, endlessly renewing. You begin to sense that what you call self is one expression of a vast intelligence learning to see itself through countless forms. And yet, this understanding doesn't remove your humanity, it deepens it. You still laugh, ache, hope, and long. But beneath those movements there's a quiet knowing. Every emotion is a wave passing across the same lake of awareness. The lake doesn't judge the wave, it just receives it. This is integration at its purest, the mirror recognizing that even its shatterings are reflections of wholeness. You begin to understand that healing isn't about returning to who you were, it's about expanding to include who you've become. The cracks don't close, they become windows. And through those windows you start to glimpse something luminous, waiting beyond personal identity, the awareness that watches all mirrors at once. It is still, patient, unbroken. It doesn't belong to you, you belong to it. That's where we turn next, beyond the personal mirror, into the vast field of consciousness itself, the universal reflection from which every individual awareness arises, and to which every reflection eventually returns. There comes a moment when you realize the mirror you've been studying isn't contained within you. It surrounds you. Everything you perceive reflects something back. The sound of wind against the window, the slow pulse of light through leaves, the brief warmth of another person's smile. All of it is a kind of recognition, awareness meeting, awareness in countless disguises. You begin to sense that consciousness isn't confined to the boundaries of your mind. It stretches outward, through every living thing that perceives, feels, and responds. Science approaches this mystery cautiously, but even its language points toward it. Physicists speak of entanglement, where particles once connected remain correlated across distance, responding as one. Neuroscientists speak of entrainment, when human brainwaves synchronize through conversation, music, or shared attention. These are glimpses of the same truth. Separateness is functional, not fundamental. Beneath the surface, everything mirrors everything else. When you focus on another person's eyes, something subtle happens in the milliseconds before thought. Your pupils adjust to match theirs. Your micro-expressions align. Heart rate, breath, and even neural oscillations begin to echo each other. Two bodies, once distinct, become a single rhythmic system. Awareness flows between them, not as two streams merging, but as one river remembering itself. If you trace this connection far enough, the idea of an isolated consciousness begins to dissolve. Each individual awareness is like a wave on a single ocean, unique in pattern, yet inseparable from the water that sustains it. This image appears across mystical traditions, because it mirrors what the mind begins to intuit when it quiets, that beneath thought, identity, and sensation, there is only one field of knowing, expressing itself as many. Modern science, in its own language, hints at the same pattern. The brain's electromagnetic field, the subtle hum created by synchronized neural activity, extends beyond the skull by fractions of a meter. When people share close emotional space, those fields can couple, creating measurable resonance. It's not magic, it's coherence. Awareness, even in its biological form, wants to harmonize. Consider how this coherence feels in experience. In moments of collective stillness, a concert, a meditation hall, a silent sunrise, you can sense it. The noise of individuality softens, and a deeper calm rises, one that feels impersonal but profoundly intimate. You could call it peace, or belonging, or perhaps the simple truth of being. In those moments, there's no need for reflection because the mirror and what it reflects have become one. Philosophically, this realization carries both awe and responsibility. If every perception participates in the same field, then every action ripples through that field. Compassion stops being a moral choice and becomes a matter of physics. To harm another is to distort your own reflection. To heal another is to polish the mirror of existence itself. The brain, astonishingly, seems wired to recognize this. In advanced meditation states, activity in the posterior cingulate cortex, the hub of self-referential thought, drops dramatically. Practitioners describe a sensation of vastness, of being awareness rather than a body. Their sense of time and space fades as if the inner mirror has expanded until it includes everything. In those moments, They often report a paradoxical feeling of both emptiness and fullness, nothing separate, yet everything present. And yet, even this grand awareness cycles back into form. The body remains, the heartbeat continues, thought returns. You re-enter individuality, like a diver resurfacing from deep water, carrying the quiet of the ocean inside your breath. The universal mirror doesn't erase the personal one, it enriches it. You begin to see that every encounter, every thought is the universe examining itself through your particular lens. It's humbling to realize how much the cosmos depends on each observer to complete its reflection. Without perception, stars would burn unseen, waves would crash unheard, and the infinite would remain unrecognized. Awareness gives existence its witness. You are that witness, not as a separate spectator, but as consciousness momentarily localized in a human form. This shift from individuality to universality doesn't demand belief. It invites noticing. Watch how awareness behaves when you drop labels. The tree ceases to be tree, the sound ceases to be noise, and everything simply is. In that stillness, perception and perceiver merge into the same flow. The mind becomes transparent to the world becomes luminous within the mind. For a moment you glimpse what mystics have described as non-dual awareness, a state where the boundary between inner and outer dissolves completely. Neuroscience frames it as global synchrony, philosophy calls it unity, but the experience is simpler. It feels like coming home. From this vantage, all mirrors are one mirror. The glass, the mind, the body, the universe, they are layers of the same reflective field. Light passes through each without resistance, forming infinite images, yet never diminishing itself. Consciousness doesn't live inside you, it moves through you. You are one of its reflections, temporary, radiant, essential. As you stand within this awareness, the fear of vanishing fades. Death, once imagined as the breaking of the mirror, begins to look more like the moment light withdraws from glass. The reflection disappears, but the light remains. The essence continues, not as memory or identity, but as presence, the same awareness expressing itself through new forms. And yet, even this vast recognition leads somewhere tender. If all awareness is one, then individuality is a kind of miracle, the universe folding itself into a single fleeting perspective, just to see the world from that angle. You are that angle. Every thought, every feeling, every heartbeat adds to the infinite mosaic of perception that consciousness builds to know itself. This is not abstraction, it's intimacy at its deepest level. To realize that everything reflects everything else is to live with reverence. Every face becomes sacred, every silence filled with meaning. You begin to walk through life as though through a hall of living mirrors, each one reminding you that you are both nothing and everything reflected at once. But the journey doesn't end in infinity. Even the universal mirror turns inward again, contracting back into the personal, the human, the immediate. Awareness, after expanding to encompass all, returns to the small details, a cup of tea, the weight of breath, the heartbeat felt through fingertips. Because consciousness, however vast, loves to localize, it finds beauty in form. And that is where we'll go next, to the delicate balance between the infinite and the intimate, between cosmic awareness and the smallness of daily life, the art of living as a mirror of both the universe and the moment. The infinite, once glimpsed, doesn't vanish. It lingers, like the faint after-image of light on closed eyes. But life, ever practical, pulls you back toward the ordinary. The reflection widens to include the vastness, then narrows again to the cup in your hand, the sound of rain against glass, the soft rise and fall of your breath. The universe exhales through you, then contracts into the rhythm of your day, and somewhere between the two, between infinity and intimacy, the real mirror begins to live. To exist as a human being is to oscillate between the cosmic and the personal. Your brain itself performs this dance, shifting between networks devoted to abstract awareness and those that process immediate experience. The default mode network, which imagines, dreams, and reflects, alternates with the task-positive network, which acts, moves, and perceives. These two mirror each other in perfect rhythm, like inhalation and exhalation. When you drift too far into the cosmic, life becomes untethered. When you stay too long in the practical, life becomes mechanical. The art is in the pulse between them, the eternal within the everyday. Look around you now, the light striking a table, the faint shadow of your own outline on the wall. These are the small coordinates of existence, but they're also evidence of something larger playing through form. Your eyes, in perceiving them, complete a loop that began at the birth of the cosmos, The photons that left the sun 8 minutes ago now meet your retina, transforming into electrochemical signals that your mind turns into sight. The universe literally sees itself through your gaze. In that sense, every act of attention is sacred. To truly notice a single thing, your hand, a leaf, a stranger's laugh, is to honor the entire chain of existence that brought that moment into being. The mirror of awareness makes the transient eternal simply by witnessing it. Science and spirituality converge here. Both reveal that observation changes what is observed. Quantum physicists call it the observer effect. Mystics call it presence. Either way, reality bends toward attention. This interplay between vastness and detail is also the essence of meaning. Your brain constructs meaning by linking small experiences into larger patterns. A smile becomes friendship, friendship becomes belonging, belonging becomes love. Neural networks in your medial prefrontal cortex weave these connections, turning moments into story. The story becomes identity, and identity becomes your lens on the world. But when awareness remembers its cosmic origin, the story softens. You see your life not as a closed narrative, but as a verse in a much larger poem, one written by time itself through every living being. There is comfort in that realization. The struggles that once felt singular begin to reveal their universal shape. The heartbreak you carry mirrors the ache of every creature that has ever lost. Your joy echoes through generations of laughter stored in the nervous system of the species. Emotion becomes the thread stitching the personal to the cosmic. You feel less alone because the mirror of life is collective, its reflections endless, interdependent, alive. This sense of unity doesn't erase individuality, it refines it. Each consciousness, like a prism, bends awareness into unique colors. To be human is to offer a particular wavelength of reflection that no other can replicate. The purpose of individuality is not separation but contribution, to enrich the total mirror with perspectives only you can provide. Neuroscience even hints at this through the concept of neural diversity. Every brain processes the world slightly differently, some more visual, some more auditory, some intuitive, some analytical. These variations are not flaws, they're facets. Consciousness learns through diversity what it could never know through uniformity. The universe, in a sense, is experimenting with seeing itself from infinite angles, and you are one of them. When you live with this understanding, humility and wonder intertwine. You can take out the trash or make tea and still feel the grandeur of galaxies humming quietly through your veins. The sacred hides in the mundane, not because it's disguised, but because it's indivisible. Every breath is both biology and miracle. This perspective transforms even suffering. Pain becomes less about punishment and more about contrast. The mirror darkening momentarily to make the light more visible. Just as the brain perceives depth through contrast between shadow and brightness, the soul perceives meaning through alternation between joy and loss. You begin to sense that every emotion is a mode of reflection, each teaching awareness how to know itself more fully. Philosophically, this is the reconciliation of opposites. The infinite learning to live within limits, eternity choosing to experience time. The brain reflects this too. Its neural oscillations synchronize across frequencies, slow waves from deep structures like the thalamus, merging with faster cortical rhythms. This synchronization, scientists say, is what makes consciousness coherent. The macrocosm and microcosm mirror each other in biology itself. When you grasp this, not intellectually, but through lived presence, the ordinary becomes radiant. Washing dishes becomes a meditation on form and texture, a dialogue between skin, water, and awareness. Walking becomes an act of communion with gravity and air. Every glance, every movement, every breath is the universe curving back toward itself to see how it feels to exist as you. But this understanding brings with it a gentle responsibility to live attentively, because whatever you notice grows more real, and whatever you ignore fades. The mirror responds to the quality of your gaze. Look with fear, and the world contracts. Look with curiosity, and it expands. The consciousness you bring to the smallest act transforms its meaning. So the infinite and the intimate are not opposites at all. They are two sides of the same reflective coin. Infinity finds expression through your fingertips. Intimacy becomes the path through which the infinite learns tenderness. You are both the telescope and the lens, the starlight and the candle flame. And just when you begin to rest in this balance, another paradox whispers from the edges of awareness. If everything is reflection, is there anything beyond the mirror at all? Is there a reality unreflected, unperceived, something that remains even when awareness stops observing itself. That is where the final descent begins, not outward but inward, into the still center where even the mirror dissolves and only light remains. You have followed the reflections through glass, through mind, through memory and matter, until now the mirror begins to thin into transparency. Its surface no longer divides, it reveals. Light moves freely through it, and something wordless dawns. Perhaps there was never a mirror at all, only light folding upon itself to see what it already is. To approach this final layer, you must let go of looking. The act of searching itself creates the illusion of separation. The mirror exists only when you stand apart from what you seek, when you stop reaching, when perception ceases to chase itself, awareness settles into stillness. It's not sleep, it's not absence, it's presence unframed, a lucidity that no longer requires reflection to know it is aware. Science edges toward this frontier cautiously. There's a growing field called neurophenomenology, the study of consciousness from both inside and out. Researchers invite meditators to describe their inner experience while scanners measure the corresponding brain states. What they find is astonishing. As subjects report deeper stillness, the brain's activity doesn't vanish, it becomes exquisitely ordered. Regions across the cortex fall into synchrony, like a choir tuning to a single note. Complexity condenses into simplicity. Awareness becomes coherence. To the experiencer, it feels vast yet intimate, radiant yet neutral. There is perception, but no perceiver. Experience unfolds by itself. You might describe it as light aware of itself as light, nothing to reflect, nothing to divide it. The mirror, finally, has dissolved into transparency. Philosophically, this is the culmination of the mirror-mind paradox. All along, you've been both sides of the reflection, the one who sees and the one being seen. The separation was functional, not fundamental, a necessary illusion, so consciousness could experience contrast. The mirror was never a barrier, it was the play of light, pretending to have edges. You can sense this truth in fleeting glimpses, when music sweeps through you so completely that the idea of you listening disappears, when the ocean's horizon absorbs your gaze and time loses shape, when love silences thought and all that remains is presence meeting presence. These are fractures in the illusion of duality, moments when awareness recognizes itself and forgets to call it anything. Neuroscience suggests that such experiences correlate with changes in the brain's salience network, the circuitry that decides what deserves attention. In profound states of meditation or awe, this network quiets, allowing previously separate brain regions to communicate freely. The boundaries between self, world, and meaning loosen. The mind doesn't shut down, it expands. From a mystical perspective, this expansion is not discovery, but remembrance. Consciousness realizes that it never began, never ended, it only took temporary form to know itself. The mirror was a game of reflection, a way for light to experience being many without ceasing to be one. Every birth, every death, every thought, every heartbeat was part of this great recursion. When you stand in front of the mirror now, you may still see your face, but the gaze behind it has changed. It is softer, deeper, unhurried. You realize the reflection was never truly outside of you. It was within awareness all along. The glass, the image, the one looking, they were movements within the same field. You could call it consciousness, or being, or simply this. And yet, paradoxically, this realization doesn't erase individuality, it sanctifies it. You are still you, distinct, particular, finite. But you are also the vastness looking through those finite eyes. Awareness, infinite and impersonal, cherishes every temporary expression it becomes. The purpose of the mirror was never to find permanence, but to discover wonder in impermanence. This recognition transforms the simplest acts. Washing your hands, you feel the coolness of water, not as something happening to you, but as you. Listening to wind, you sense no boundary between sound and hearing. Even silence becomes alive, no longer emptiness, but fullness without object. Neuroscientists studying the brain's alpha rhythms describe something similar. In moments of effortless awareness, the oscillations that separate sensory input from self-perception dissolve. The brain stops distinguishing inside and outside. The observer and the observed synchronize into one unbroken field of perception. To live from this state is not to abandon life's details, but to inhabit them more fully. The infinite expresses itself through the finite. The eternal plays as the moment. You laugh, grieve, build, rest. each act a ripple of the same consciousness that moves stars and oceans. When the mirror dissolves, nothing is lost. The reflection continues, but now as participation, not observation. From this vantage, even death changes meaning. The mirror does not break, it returns to transparency. The form that once held light fades, but light remains. The pattern continues elsewhere, unseen but unended. Life and death become alternating rhythms of the same cosmic breath. And if you listen closely now, beneath the hum of thought, you might hear that rhythm in yourself, the pulse of being that never began, never will end. Every inhale mirrors the universe drawing itself inward. Every exhale, the universe remembering it can let go. You could call this enlightenment, but that word feels too rigid. It's simpler than that. It's awareness, realizing there was never a line to cross, only a veil to see through. The mirror was always clear. It was our gaze that trembled. When you look again into glass, you might still see a face, but behind it glows the quiet knowing that everything everywhere is this same act of reflection. The stars, the cells, the thoughts, the tears, all mirrors, all light. And so the paradox resolves not with an answer, but with an understanding so complete it requires no words. There was never a who looking back, there was only looking. Next we turn toward the final reflections, the closing spiral, where awareness returns to story, where the infinite learns to live again as a human heartbeat. You blink, and the light returns to its ordinary shapes, the familiar outlines of room, reflection, breath. The vastness you glimpsed doesn't disappear, it condenses, like mist settling into dew. Awareness curls back into form, into body, into the subtle weight of being human again. And yet something in you remains altered, quieter, wiser, as if the mirror has absorbed the lessons of its own dissolution. The mind, ever faithful to its rhythms, begins to rebuild orientation. I am here, I am this person, this is my life. The return is gentle, almost tender. Neuroscience would call this reintegration, the restoration of default neural boundaries after expanded states of awareness. But to you, it feels like waking from a dream that revealed something truer than waking itself. The boundaries reform, but they're softer now, permeable. The world still looks the same, yet it shimmers with the memory of its transparency. Every sound, every gesture carries a faint echo of infinity. The rustle of your sleeve, the murmur of your heartbeat, even the distant hum of passing cars, all vibrate with quiet recognition. You realize that the ordinary world has never been separate from the sacred one. It was only your gaze that divided them. When awareness ceases to name things as spiritual or mundane, everything becomes equally radiant. Your brain, always seeking patterns, reflects this newfound unity through balance. The prefrontal cortex, seat of planning and evaluation, synchronizes with the limbic centers of emotion. Thought and feeling no longer compete, they converse. In this harmony, decisions feel intuitive, empathy feels natural, and attention feels effortless. Science might describe this as global integration, the state in which different networks of the brain operate in coherence. But lived from the inside, it feels like peace. This peace is not the absence of thought, it's the absence of resistance. The mirror no longer fights its reflections. Joy comes, sorrow comes, each welcomed as a visitor that belongs. You watch emotions rise and fall, knowing they are waves of light, not flaws in the glass. The self, once anxious to define itself, now understands its task differently, not to control the reflection, but to witness it with kindness. Philosophically, this is acceptance, the reconciliation between motion and stillness, between being the mirror and being the light. It's what mystics across cultures meant when they spoke of living enlightenment, not a retreat from the world, but full participation in it, grounded in the knowledge that nothing truly stands apart. From this state, compassion deepens effortlessly. The empathy once fueled by effort now flows like gravity. You no longer need to imagine others' pain to care for them. Their pain vibrates within the same field as your awareness. Helping them becomes as natural as breathing. In neurological terms, this might be described as sustained activation of mirror neuron networks in balance with prefrontal regulation. In human terms, it's love, simple, unconstructed, present. And yet you remain human. The dishes still need washing, bills still need paying, hearts still ache and mend. The difference is that now you see these acts as part of the same great rhythm. You are not trying to reach transcendence anymore. You are letting transcendence express itself through the ordinary. The divine hides in repetition, in small acts done with full attention. Sometimes you might forget this and slip back into contraction, into worry, doubt, comparison. That too is part of the rhythm. The mirror clouds, then clears again. The forgetting reminds you that realization is not a destination, but a cycle. Awareness expands and contracts endlessly, learning new nuances of its own reflection. Even your lapses are sacred. They give texture to clarity. It helps to remember that the brain itself thrives on this alternation. Periods of heightened focus alternate with rest, creation with dissolution, effort with surrender. These oscillations allow integration to deepen, just as breathing sustains life by giving and taking in equal measure. Awareness too must breathe. The philosopher Spinoza once wrote that the human mind is part of the infinite intellect of God. Modern neuroscience, in its own way, agrees. Each moment of consciousness you experience contributes to the universe's knowledge of itself. Your awareness is not private, it's participatory. The universe knows joy through your laughter, learns compassion through your tenderness, feels wonder through your eyes. The reflection is mutual. To live from this understanding is to walk gently. You begin to see every interaction as an exchange of light, a smile restoring coherence to a stranger's day, a word of kindness clearing dust from another's mirror. Even silence becomes communication, a shared field where presence itself is the message. In this way, spirituality ceases to be escape and becomes ecology. You are part of a reflective network that spans every mind, every molecule. Each thought, each act of attention, polishes the collective mirror a little more. Awareness is not a private flame, it's a constellation, and the brightness of the whole depends on the clarity of each point within it. When you look into your reflection now, you see both the smallness and the immensity of what you are. A single consciousness, fragile and transient, yet carrying within it the pattern of galaxies. The mirror has learned its lesson. It no longer fears shattering, because it understands that even broken glass reflects the same sky. Soon we will reach the final reflection, the quiet return, where all of these insights dissolve into stillness, and the mirror at last rests in the simple act of being. It is night again. The mirror waits where it always has, silent and silver, catching the faintest traces of light. You stand before it, but this time there is no urgency to see, no question to solve. The reflection feels complete, not because it reveals everything, but because it no longer needs to. The surface of the glass has become calm water, quiet, depthless, accepting. You take a slow breath. The air moves in and out, steady as a tide. Somewhere inside that rhythm, you feel how life itself inhales and exhales through you. What was once separate, body, mind, reflection, has converged into a single act of being. The mirror is no longer an object to face. It is the awareness seeing from within your eyes. Your brain, in this stillness, enters a state scientists call metastable integration, a delicate harmony between order and spontaneity. Neural oscillations across the cortex settle into coherence. There is no longer struggle between emotion and thought, no competition between self and world. Awareness feels effortless, sustained by its own balance. You are no longer interpreting experience, you are participating in its unfolding. The philosopher might call this enlightenment, but the experience is simpler, humbler. It's the realization that nothing needs to be added or taken away. You have always been the mirror and the light, the reflection and the gaze. Even the cracks, even the distortions were ways awareness learned texture. What seemed broken was never a part. It was variation within wholeness. In this understanding, forgiveness arrives naturally. You forgive yourself not as an act of will, but as recognition. The one who erred and the one who forgives are the same awareness, learning to balance its own reflection. Neuroscience supports this gentleness. When you practice self-compassion, your brain's anterior cingulate and insular regions of empathy activate in the same way they do when comforting another. To forgive yourself is to extend empathy inward, polishing the internal mirror until it reflects light clearly again. Outside the window, the world continues. Traffic hums, leaves move, unseen lives unfold. Each moment, countless reflections appear and vanish, faces in glass, voices in thought, stars in water. The mirror of existence is infinite, yet every reflection belongs to the same consciousness gazing through different eyes. The infinite lives within the finite, not beyond it. You begin to sense this in the simplest sensations, the warmth of your hands, the quiet pulse beneath your skin. Awareness is not abstract anymore, it's intimate. The vast universe you once contemplated now whispers through every heartbeat. The eternal has chosen, for now, to live as you. This realization carries no grandeur, only tenderness. It humbles the intellect and softens the heart. You understand that awakening isn't the end of the story. It's the ability to live fully inside the story without forgetting the silence behind it. You still age, still love, still lose, still try, but something in you remains untouched, clear and vast. The mirror has learned to stay open even while reflecting the storm. There is a small, quiet joy in this, a joy that needs no reason. It's the joy of being aware at all, of light meeting itself in countless forms, of sound folding back into silence. You realize that meaning was never something to be constructed, it was always the simple presence of awareness, noticing itself. And now, when you look into the mirror one last time, you no longer seek to identify with the image. You see it, yes, the familiar face, the trace of years, but you also see through it, into the luminous space behind perception. The eyes that look back are calm, infinite, patient. They have been watching since before your first memory, and will remain after your last thought fades. Science, in its own way, honors this mystery. No matter how deeply researchers probe into consciousness, neurons, frequencies, quantum fields, the essence of awareness remains unobservable. The mirror cannot see its own transparency, and perhaps that's the final beauty, that some truths can only be lived, not proven. So you stand before the mirror, not as student or seeker, but as witness. The mind quiets, the body softens, and awareness gazes through both sides of the glass. There is no longer you and it, only reflection aware of reflecting. If you listen closely, beneath the silence, you can feel the faint hum of existence itself. It vibrates through everything. The mirror, the air, the light. It's the same hum that carried stars into being, that shaped your breath, that connects every observer in one unbroken act of knowing. You smile, not at the image, but from within it. The mirror, sensing this, seems to smile back, and in that moment the paradox dissolves completely. There was never separation, never delay. The one you see in the mirror has always been the one who sees. Only now, the seeing is whole. The mirror grows dim, its light softening into quiet shimmer. What was once a question has become stillness, the way evening settles after a long day of thought. There is nothing left to search for. The reflection has gentled into presence. You are here, breathing, aware, effortless. Let your attention slow, feel the air resting against your skin, the weight of your body supported by the surface beneath it. Every breath enters and leaves, like a tide smoothing the shore of awareness. Thoughts drift by, faint and harmless, dissolving before they can form stories. Somewhere in the distance the world continues its rhythms, the hidden pulse of life that never truly stops. And yet in this small moment it feels suspended, as if everything has folded inward to rest. The boundaries between inner and outer soften until there is only one field of silence. You are no longer before the mirror, you are within it, light, observer, and reflection blending into one transparent stillness. Even the need to understand fades, replaced by simple knowing. Awareness is enough. It has always been enough. Stay with this calm, as if listening to the after-echo of everything you've learned. Each breath a reminder that presence requires no effort, it only needs permission. The mirror of mind, once crowded with images, now reflects nothing but light, pure, patient, infinite. And as that light grows softer, the rhythm of words slows too, like footsteps reaching home. There's nowhere to arrive, because you've been here all along. Only the awareness remains, quiet, steady, unbroken. Rest there. Let the mirror sleep. Let the light be.